Good afternoon, everyone, council, staff, and audience members. I'd like to reconvene this council meeting of Tuesday, April the 23rd. Staff, do we have any additions or changes to the agenda?
There's none from staff, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillors, is there any additions or changes to the agenda from you? Okay, seeing none. Councillors, any disclosure of interest on any items? Councillor Flynn.
Item 9.3, the applicants are clients of mine.
Okay, thank you very much. So you'll exit at that time. Any other conflicts of interest? Hearing none, we'll move into our agenda, starting with item 5.1, confirmation of minutes from the regular council meeting of April the 8th. We have a motion.
Moved by Councillor Flynn, seconded by Councillor Cannon, that the regular council meeting minutes of April 8, 2019 be adopted as circulated.
Are there any errors or omissions to those minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you. Item 6.1, Development Planning Services Committee meeting minutes of April 15th. We have a motion.
Moved by Councillor Wallace Richmond, seconded by Councillor Cannon, that the Development and Planning Services Committee meeting minutes of April 15, 2019 be received as information.
Any errors or omissions to those minutes? All those in favor? Thank you. 6.2, Shuswap Regional Airport Operations Committee meeting minutes of March the 20th. We have a motion.
Moved by Councillor Cannon, seconded by Councillor Flynn, that the Shuswap Regional Airport Operations Committee meeting minutes of March 20, 2019 be received as information.
Thank you. Any errors or omissions to those minutes? All those in favor? Thank you. If council has any questions, I think we've spoken about most of the items on there previously. Item 6.3, Environmental Advisory Committee meeting minutes of April the 4th, 2019. We have a motion.
Moved by Councillor Lindgren, seconded by Councillor Wallace Richmond, that the Environmental Advisory Committee meeting minutes of April 4, 2019 be received as information.
Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Lindgren. Apologies, Councillor Lindgren. Go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to bring your attention to the committee is collecting information right now about possible air quality monitoring. There's some information about having air quality monitored near highways and near kids' parks and things like that. And so you can look forward to that coming to you in the future.
Great, thank you very much. And I do appreciate you adding comments to the minutes. Any other items? All those in favor? Thank you. Item 6.4, Greenways Liaison Committee meeting minutes of March the 7th. We have a motion.
Moved by Councillor Lavery, seconded by Councillor Flynn, that the Greenways Liaison Committee meeting minutes of March 7, 2019 be received as information.
Any errors or omissions? I just have one question around the minutes. Item 7.3, and I could be corrected on this, but it says that a concern was brought to GLC related to dogs on trails and rules around leashes. It was clarified that dogs are required to be on leash by bylaw in all city parks, including Little Mountain and South Canoe trails within the city. Now, when I look at bylaw 2119, I couldn't find that. So, is that the case? Perhaps Director of Engineering and Public Works, are you able to clarify that?
Not all parks require dogs on leash. So I can't remember which ones are specifically.
I think I have them listed here, so.
Yeah, it's our dog park in Canoe and so on.
Because the bylaw actually says these parks are allowed dogs and need leashes. Blackburn, Jackson and Canoe, Klahani, McGuire, and Marine Park.
Correct.
But parks like Little Mountain, like South Canoe, Coyote Park, do not require leashes as far as I know. Okay, Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thanks, Your Worship. I was just going to clarify that. I think it's an ongoing discussion as well here. It was partially brought up with some of the Park Hill Trails things. So I think at this stage right now, we'll carry that business forward and talk about it a little bit more as we go through in Greenways. But that's the information as it stands now.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's they're allowed because of omission from the bylaw, the statement of those parks. Councillor Flynn?
Well, as we,
I struggle with this because the minutes are specifically saying Little Mountain and South Canoe need leashes, and yet the bylaw says the opposite. And at Little Mountain, as an example, I can see leashes being mandatory on the field, even though their dogs roar around that field. But in the trails, I don't see that needing to be on leash. So I agree that we need to clarify. And when we didn't have clarification at the waterfront is when we had all the conflict, when there was people self-enforcing non-existent bylaws. And so I think we need fairly soon to provide some clarity. And I did bring this up a couple months ago, but the new commissioner wanted clarity too, and I guess we need to provide them with clarity, because I can just imagine if the commissioner is finding people for having dogs off leash in Little Mountain, Councillor Lavery would have a fine.
Okay. You know, the bylaw is quite clear because I just read it recently, and the parks that we read here have to have a dog on a leash. The rest do not. So I would say these minutes are inaccurate.
Okay, thank you.
I maybe just check with Councillor Lavery as the chair. Councillor Lavery, are you comfortable taking out that second sentence?
At this stage, Your Worship, I think we could, I'd suggest that further clarification is needed, and that GLC will report back in the next meeting about those clarifications.
Okay, fair enough. So we'll leave the minutes as they are and you'll come back with some clarification.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments around the minutes? All those in favor? Thank you. Item 7, skip over today. Item 13. It's listed as item 13 because it's a delegation and presentation by Angela Spencer from BDO Canada. Welcome, Angela, to Council. Thank you for coming and presenting to us.
Thank you, Your Worship and Councillors. So I'm going to give a highlight of the financial position as at December 31st. Excuse my voice, I'm just getting over a cold at the moment. So I'm with BDO, I'm a partner with BDO, and we complete the external audit on an annual basis of the city. So overall, included in your package is our final audited financial statements that are subject to your approval today. In terms of some overall highlights, we have issued what we consider an unqualified audit opinion, which means that the financial statements are free of material misstatement. Also included in your package is our final report, which just discloses all of the findings from our audit and our required communications. There was nothing significant that we felt was necessary to report to you in terms of internal controls or unadjusted audit differences. So overall, there was an annual surplus of the year of $5.9 million. That was compared to prior year surplus of $5.7 million. Capital additions for the year amounted to $9.8 million, and included that was recognized into income about 1.7 of the DCCs. So this following slide is just a snapshot of the overall assets and liabilities of the city as at December 31st. Financial assets was up to $62.3 million, over $57 million last year. That was largely due to surpluses being shifted into investments during the year. So investments was sitting up close to $55 million. Liabilities was up slightly from $21 million up to $2.3 million. That's just some timing of projects, ongoing projects during the year, sitting in accounts receivable. Overall debt has decreased, so continuing to pay down your existing debt with some additional increase in short-term borrowings during the year. So overall, your net financial assets is sitting at 14.8 million. So that's essentially your assets less your current liabilities. In terms of your tangible capital assets, that, excuse me, increased by, I mentioned, $9.8 million during the year. Most notable were $4.2 million in road drainage and infrastructure upgrades, $1.2 million in building upgrades, including water pollution control center upgrades, the Shaw Center, and renovations to the police department, new vehicle additions for the fire department, Hudson Street beautification, and sewer and water upgrades. These capital additions of 9.8 were offset by amortization during the year. So I'm just
Angela, if council has questions on slides, do you want us just to wait till the end?
or you
That
can
work
interrupt
out for
me and just ask them as we go if you'd prefer.
Okay, is it possible to go back to the second slide?
Yes.
Sorry. I wasn't sure. I just wanted to make sure I understood. So the second bullet, so our annual surplus increased about 170,000 over
Yes.
the course of 2018. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
So this slide shows just overall the comparison to prior years. So the current year being in green, the prior year being in kind of a light peach, and red being the budgeted amounts that were set by council. So overall revenues came in at just over 37 million, so 37,175,000, compared to prior year of 35.7 million, and a budget of 34.4 million. Some of the large differences in terms of what was budgeted and what actually came in relate to developer and other contributions. So this is recognition of those revenues as projects are underway. So that was 2 million over budget, just in terms of the timing of projects that came through. The other areas of more controlled revenue streams were very much in line with budget, and also just up slightly over last year. My next slide just highlights your revenue by sources. So this illustrates really where your overall income sources come from. Not surprisingly, the largest being taxation, just over 21 million. Sales and services, this came in at $7.2 million for the year. And then grants and other government contributions at 2.3. Investment income came in at sorry, I've got that mixed up, at 1.5, and licenses, permits, rentals, fines, 2.1 million, and developer and other contributions was recognized just under $3 million this year. So similarly, I've just highlighted here overall expenses compared to prior year and also compared to budget. Total expenses were at $31.5 million this year. That was up over prior year of 29.9 million and a budget of 25 million. Some reasons for those overall variances, overall your expenditures were up about 4% over last year. And that really is driven by your salary wages increase, which also increased by 4%. Due to some new positions, overall increase in salary and wages for the year. Compared to budget, the largest reason for some of the variances to budget, amortization is not budgeted for. So some of those categories, such as transportation services, there was about $4 million worth of amortization included in there, which created some of the variance from budget. And also under water and sewer services, the same thing for that difference. There was about $1.7 million in amortization that was not budgeted for in that category. So really just bringing in line with public sector accounting standards where we record the amortization. And again, this slide just illustrates the over expenditures by type of expenditures. As mentioned, your most significant expense is your wages and benefits, coming in at about 9.2 million. There is a value that's missing there. That's $2.8 million for your repairs and maintenance. Contracts came in at $7.5 million. Operating expenses of 1.9, and other expenses makes up the remaining.
Can I just ask you, and councillors, please feel welcome to press your button if you have a question. Utilities and property tax, how is that an expense?
Sorry, the expenses related to utilities and property, I'll have to just open here. That, excuse me, Mayor, that should probably be captured as utility services would be a better caption to describe
Okay.
that. So the costs that are associated with that.
Okay, with that function. Got it. Thank you. Councillor Flynn?
Yeah, I kind of forgot what I was gonna ask. It was really important at the moment, but clearly it's not quite as important now.
If it does come up, feel free to ask
I
me.
will, if I ever remember it.
Thank you. So this following slide just provides an overview of the change in your net financial assets. So as I mentioned, your assets less your liabilities increased by about $4 million during the year, and this illustrates how that came about. It really illustrates more of the cash flow, taking into account tangible capital assets less the amortization piece. So that contributed to your overall accumulated surplus by $4 million this year. And then my last slide, just as I mentioned, so your overall accumulated surplus is sitting at $232,686,819. That's primarily made up of what your investment in infrastructure and assets for the year is. So this slide just illustrates that investment in tangible capital assets, less any outstanding debt, comes in at $213.5 million. And then the remaining accumulated surplus is made up of reserves set aside. So you've got your DCCs and your statutory reserves there to come up to the $232 million. So that's all I had in terms of my overview. Was there any questions on the slides or in the financial statements or audit in general?
Council, any questions? Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Your Worship. And how long ago was it that PSAC brought out all the new capital asset reporting rules? Is it
That was back in 2000 and I want to say it was either 2007 or 2008.
Oh, it's been that long.
Yes.
One of the things that's at every convention we go to now is talk about asset management.
Yes.
And I think we're managing our assets well, but we're not doing anything formal like a lot of communities are.
Right.
Yet, I think we're doing a very good job. Is there more that could be done with regards to asset management?
I won't be able to comment because I haven't reviewed, what in terms of the city's doing for their capital management process. I'm happy to, meet with Chelsea to go over what your plans are or what is being done. I know it is a big project for a lot of our other municipalities. And really, they're looking at the fact that, yes, we have these capital assets that are sitting on the balance sheet at cost, and there's a lot of servicing and increased costs associated with managing, repairing, keeping those up to current standards. And so making sure that, that forward-looking information and those estimates are really accurate and conservative overall in terms of managing those assets going forward. So I can't comment because I haven't looked at your, asset management plan at this stage, but I'm happy to do so going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wallace-Richmond?
Thanks, Your Worship. Thanks for being here. I have a question about the comparison of budget to actuals on the revenue side.
Yes.
And maybe it might actually be a CFO question, but I'll try.
Sure.
So the 2018 actuals over budget on the return on investment. Can you talk a little bit about the kinds of investments that we're allowed to make? I mean, we can't invest just in anything. It seems to have exceeded the...
Chelsea's probably a better one to answer this. I know there are some investments that you don't budget for that return on investment. So in erring in the side of conservatism, similar to amortization, investment income is not one that's budgeted for or relied on going forward. Okay. So it often is that it's overstated or that you're over budget when it comes to the actuals.
I see. Okay, that's good. Good feedback. Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Angela, could we just look at the cumulative surplus slide, the one before this questions one? And this may also be a question for the Chief Financial Officer, but it's really information that that I wanted to share, because when people look at the total accumulated surplus of the city being 232 million,
Yes.
they think we have all this money. Of course, 217 million, about 218 million's in tangible capital assets. The part I think that's the least understood is the DCCs and statutory reserves, which are about 20 million. And those are targeted reserves that we can't just spend on anything.
Absolutely.
So can you just comment on that?
Yes, I think from an audit standpoint and also from a management perspective, always being able to squirrel money away and make sure that you're planning ahead for those infrastructure upgrades, for replacing some large items, such as a new pool or that. Those things all need to be planned and planned long term, so that you're not impacting the current tax rates of your jurisdiction in any given year. So income smoothing, if you call it. So these reserves are really set aside by bylaw and cannot be spent on anything other than what their intended purpose are. And so included in your financial statements is a lot more detail than what I've got up here in terms of the specific underlying reserves that have been set aside by yourselves for future spending and projects.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Said that really well. Thanks very much. Councillor Lindgren.
Yeah, thanks. So it looks like our annual income's around $36 or $37 million, our revenue, but we had almost 6 million left over. Is that, it seems like such a lot of money. Why do we do that?
I will comment that, from a public sector accounting standards, there is timing on when we recognize some revenues. So, when we do look at the revenues, there's certain sources that are very consistent, such as your taxation or your sales of service, licensing, and that are easy able to kind of budget for. Some of the ones that can create swings from just an accounting standpoint are around really the grants and your deferred cost charges, because those are brought into income as those projects are spent. And so often that can create kind of I don't want to call it an artificial swing, but an accounting swing in your results that don't really reflect that you have budgeted to have a surplus of 5.9 million. In fact, when you do your budgets, you're of course budgeting to a nil result, and included in the notes to the financial statement is a reconciliation from that budget to where you ended up from an accounting standpoint. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn.
That number, though, also has to do with amortization, too.
Absolutely. So there's some accounting pieces that come into play there that if you go to the reconciliation in your notes are from budget to what the actual surplus is, items like amortization are backed out of that.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Any other questions from council? Thank you very much for coming and sharing your information with us today.
Thank you.
Much
and thank you
appreciated.
very much to Chelsea and Bianca and the finance team, Tracy. Excellent job this year. Thank you.
Super. Okay, we'll move on very timely to 8.1. Chief Financial Officer 2018 financial statements. We'll get a motion up on the screen for that. I could have a mover and a seconder. Councillor Cannon moves, Councillor Flynn seconds. Administrator, if you'd read the motion.
Moved by Councillor Cannon, seconded by Councillor Flynn, that the financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2018 be adopted as presented.
Thank you. Chief Financial Officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. The draft financial statements have been provided to you. My memo comprises the changes between 2017 and 2018, which Angela also discussed in her presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Council, any questions around this report? I know you've had lots of opportunity to ask previously. All those in favor? Thank you. Carried unanimously. 8.2, Chief Financial Officer 2019 assessments / new construction, and this is for information, so we don't need a motion. I will open it up to Chief Financial Officer and see if she would like to speak to her memo.
Sure. Thank you, Your Worship. So the 2019 assessment notices have been issued and a summary of the average inflationary changes is provided. Class 1 residential properties saw an average increase of 5.91% compared to 9.83% last year. It's important to note that the tax rate is adjusted to collect the same amount of revenue. that we saw in 2018, plus any approved tax increase by council. So this would result in the only time that a property owner would see an increase or decrease in their general municipal levy is if their assessment increase or decrease was more or less than the average. So the new growth factor that we projected in the 2019 initial budget was 2%, and the actual new growth came in at 2.01. So I think that was a very accurate assessment.
Great, thank you. Any questions from council? Okay, I'd just like to make comment, or does council have any comment or no? The residential Class 1 assessment increased 5.9%, and as our Director of Finance said, that if your house assessment increased more than 5.9, you would expect a larger tax increase than if it was less, because we base our ad valorem on the assessed value. I was interested that the light industry assessment increased almost 11%. The business increased 5.6. And we have the same tax ratio for those two. Is there any reason that one would increase almost double the other?
I couldn't speak to it,
okay.
Your Worship.
Yeah. No, understand. I need to talk to the assessment people. Got it. Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Worship. And I always like to focus on this too, because people will read this and go, okay, our taxes are going to go up 6%, or they're going to go up 6% plus 3.3. And I think it's really important to emphasize that it's the average home. If your increase was that exact 5.91%, your taxes are going up to 3.3, and it skews it slightly depending. I think the answer to your question, because I saw that too and was trying to analyze it, if you remember when we harmonized the multiplier for those two, there was very little in that light industry class. So I think if any one of those light industry businesses got a significant assessment increase, partly because of work done, perhaps, all of those things, it would skew it. Business had way more people in it. If I remember correctly, when we harmonized, had way more revenue in it. So individual improvements wouldn't skew it so much. So my guess is it's something to do with the lack of businesses in that light industry, and also that one of them could do some changes that could skew it upwards.
Okay, yeah, that's, I never thought of that, but I think you're probably right, and that's fair, because then the actual light industries whose assessment increase was less than 10 would, their taxes would also be less. Yep. And congratulations to staff for being so accurate with projected growth, 2% versus 2.01.
That 0.01.
Pretty impressive. Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions around that? Oh, Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thanks, Mayor Harrison. And just following up on both you and Councillor Flynn on that, the advice that we had a couple of years ago when we harmonized was that, number one, for light industry, some of you may be thinking you're classified as business, but there's the risk of going to light industry. And number two, there were suggestions that the light industry tax class assessment might be growing in the future as well. So I think that what we did 2 years ago essentially has come to fruition in a lot of ways. And I think this is, it relatively inoculates light industry as to what it could have been if we hadn't done that. So I think that we got good input from folks, and especially out in the industrial park, and we see the implication here now. So I think that we were positioned, I think, and light industry was inoculated to some degree.
That's a really good point. Thank you very much. Okay, 8.3, Director of Corporate Services, cancellation of notice on title. We have a proposed motion. Could I have a mover and a seconder for that motion? Councillor Wallace-Richmond, second Councillor Lavery. If the administrator would read the motion, please.
Moved by Councillor Wallace-Richmond, seconded by Councillor Lavery, that the notice filed against the property title of Lot 5, Plan 18330, be cancelled.
Thank you. Is there any staff member wishing to speak to this motion? Corporate Officer, thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. A notice on title was placed on this property due to a building infraction in 2012, and I've been advised by the manager of licensing and permits that it has been resolved and can be removed.
Great, thank you very much. Any questions from council? All those in favor? Passed unanimously, thank you. Moving forward to 8.4, Director of Engineering and Public Works, UVA, and drone use for information. So there's not a motion associated with this. I'd ask the Director of Engineering and Public Works if you'd like to comment.
So, Your Worship, I was asked to prepare a memo in regards to drone use within and how it's regulated. And so these are commonly known as unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs or drones. They are regulated by the federal government through Transport Canada. And there's two different classifications. One, if it's under 35 kilograms or 77 pounds, then it's recreational. If it's over that, then they require a special license to operate them. And then they have to go through a series, quite an extensive series of testing. They almost have to become a pilot of these UAVs. So one of the things, I've included a fact sheet on the recreational use to give you some information. But it's interesting, Transport Canada does have they do regulate the use of the AUVs in airspace. And because we're in an aerodrome, 9 kilometers around our airport is an area of interest or non-drone use. So anyone flying within those areas, as long as they're not interfering with flight paths or other things, they're allowed to use recreational drones. But if they have a license, if they're a larger drone, then they actually should be filing a flight record with our airport if they're going to be anywhere near our airport and interfering with aircraft. So it's really about aircraft, but it is interesting, on the Transport Canada website, there is an area for an incident report. So and some of the items that they list in their incident report are obviously flying near aerodromes, flying near aircraft, flying over people or populated areas, flying over private property. So the public can make a complaint or submit something to Transport Canada for them to investigate. So the rules are still a little vague in regards to the municipality's responsibility. We do have although Transport Canada regulates the use of these drones, it doesn't preclude the municipality from creating a bylaw to regulate them over public spaces, roads or parks. Now, we don't have a bylaw that regulates it. We do not have control over the lake. Unfortunately, that's a provincial matter. So essentially what it boils down to is there are rules in place. There's actually, the rules are changing. They're actually getting a little more refined in the next couple months. They've got a new regulation set out. But in summary, essentially, if a UAV or a drone is being flown improperly or over somebody's private property or over the lake or somewhere where they don't feel it's appropriate, you can report that through Transport Canada. You can report it to the RCMP, or you can report it, if it's actually interfering with wildlife, you could report it to the province through the RAP. So there are options. If the city were to put signs up, we have no way to regulate them unless we have a bylaw. And that would mean that we would have to enforce those regulations if we create a bylaw. So those are things for council to consider.
Great, thank you very much for that clarification. Councillors, do you have any questions or comments around this report? Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thanks, Mayor Harrison, and thanks to staff for the report and some clarification that leads to more confusion for me, actually, basically, and maybe that's just my own processing. I see staff nodding their heads here. So I appreciated the distribution graphic of no drone zones on page 53 of our report.
and it references one set of numbers. But then in the recreational part, it says 5.6 kilometers
Yeah.
from a zone. And I think so that discrepancy has been brought up at least in day-to-day conversation that I've had here. So for my own reference, is the wharf 5.6 kilometers away from?
Your
Director
Worship,
of Engineering and Public Works?
the wharf is within that 5.6 kilometers.
Okay.
Now, that still, again, that regulates about height and different usages. Now, unfortunately, this isn't really a no-drone zone. It just means that you have to follow the rules if you're flying within an aerodrome. And because that map shows that, 9 kilometers is a pretty large radius around our community. In fact, it encompasses our entire community. So, and it's not unlike other cities that have airports. You're still allowed to fly your drones as long as you're following the prescribed rules.
And just so I'm clear, the prescribed rules are make sure you're under 90 meters above the ground, and then you could fly as close to an aerodrome as you could, as far as we understand it.
As far as we understand it, yes, and it's essentially unless there's a complaint made. But the problem here is, even if there's a complaint made, how do you enforce it?
No,
How do you know which drone it was, where they were flying it from? Because these are remotely flown. I had a complaint the other day regarding a drone flying over the foreshore, and they suspected that the fellow flying the drone was actually in the Prestige parking lot. So that's private property to private property. So there's nothing that we could have done about it anyways. But I suggested to that individual that they put a complaint into either the RCMP or through the RAP, because I believe it was interfering with some of the wildlife in the foreshore.
Thank you.
So as a follow-up, Your Worship, on this, and thanks for the report. City of Salmon Arm has sponsored a SILGA resolution for debate about asking provincial and federal governments to provide some clarification on environmental sensitive areas, especially the nesting habitat, and that's not on the flying for fun thing we have. So I think that we can certainly proceed with that and see where it gets us. I'm wondering if, and some of the user groups and individuals I know, if we could at least publicly or share, I guess, is the information of where do you go to make a complaint about a transaction. I think that would be helpful to share that with, I'm looking at Councillor Lindgren here, but I think this issue came up through the EAC, it's come up through SABNIS. So at least sharing the information as to where one would go to make a complaint. So I think that if that's distributed to council, we could communicate that out. And I guess we just keep on proceeding with this, see what happens out of SILGA, hopefully UBCM. UBCM has indicated they haven't seen a resolution like this before, so I'm anticipating if it's supported at SILGA, perhaps it'll go on to UBCM and get that on the provincial docket. And at this stage right now, I'm not in favor of, certainly of signs of a bylaw that we can't enforce anyhow, but there may be, and I'm not calling for this now, but I think an opportunity with this Flying for Fun poster here about sharing that information with some of our user groups as well to get that information out there, and again with a direction of where to go to make a reported transaction.
Thank you, Councillor Lavery. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to staff for the report. This councillor at this table has no desire to look at any bylaw or municipal legislation to try to control this. I don't think it's a huge issue. I think senior levels of government need to deal with it, and quite clearly it's Transport Canada. But I do agree with everybody that says we should educate who people should contact and what the rules are in some way, shape, or form, but I don't want to see us getting into dealing with this municipally.
Thank you. Any other councillors have comments or questions? Okay, first of all, I think it's good that it's going to SILGA, and look forward to that. I made a presentation down at Lakeside Manor a week ago, and one of the residents there, when I asked if he had any questions, she said, "Is there anything you can do about the drones that come by my window?" So I said, well, I'll take that as information, and I know that we're talking about it. And so that would be a sort of a private property piece. Certainly in my thoughts are, I'm wondering about informational signage. I know that we don't have a bylaw, and in order to enforce it will be difficult. But I'm wondering, through SABNIS, whether some type of signage that is informational only, that could be at Peter Janik Park, that could be on the wharf, that would be designed to let users know the detriment to possible wildlife of flying drones. So I just want to put that out there. We're going to Silga at the end of April, but it's something I would like everyone to think about. And while I know that it's not enforceable by the city, sometimes those things are subtly enforced by other people that happen to be there. Like, hey, you see that sign? It's not, you're scaring the wildlife by flying your drone. So it's a kind of a pressure from the public. So I'm leaning in that way, but I will wait to see where it goes at Silga, and we'll bring this back following that. Any other councillor comments before we move forward on the agenda? Okay, thank you. We're to section 9, introduction of bylaws. To do with the 2019 final budget. And there's a number. The first one is City of Salmon Arm 2019 to 2023 Financial Plan Amendment Bylaw number 4322, first, second, and third readings. Can I have a mover for that? Councillor Lavery, Councillor Wallace-Richmond second. Have the administrator read, please.
Moved by Councillor Lavery, seconded by Councillor Wallace-Richmond, that the following bylaws be read a first, second, and third time. Number 1, City of Salmon Arm 2019 to 2023 Financial Plan Amendment Bylaw number 4322. And number 2, City of Salmon Arm 2019 Annual Rate of Taxation Bylaw number 4323.
Thank you. So we'll do A and B together. Thank you very much. Chief Financial Officer.
Thank you. This amendment is to reflect the 2019 assessments and taxes, carry forward projects from 2018, tax requisitions from other governments, council resolutions made thus far, and to redirect allocations between budget accounts. The budget and associated tax rate bylaw reflects a 3.3% tax increase approved by council and actual new construction revenue of 2.01%. It also reflects the equalization of tax rates between Class 5 and Class 6 per Council's 2017 resolution. Finally, the amendment also reflects the proposed $30 increase to the transportation parcel tax, and the additional revenue generated has been directed towards the Transportation Capital Asphaltic Overlays Program. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Great. Thank you very much. Council, do you have any questions around this report? Or comments? Welcome as well. Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thanks, Mayor Harrison. It's a procedural question, actually. So we are proposed to do first, second, and third readings. It includes the, if I understand correctly, the transportation parcel tax increase before we look at the parcel tax increase.
I'll refer that to staff.
Is that?
Your Worship, the budget can be amended after the fact if council makes a change based on the bylaw.
Or can we skip a hold to the part? I think it is going to be approved. It just, or can we do it the other way around, looking at 9.2 first and then go back to the budget?
I mean, I don't have a problem doing the transportation parcel tax first.
Chief Administrative Officer, can we go to 9.2 and then come back to 9.1?
Yes, we could.
And that makes sense. And so the process for doing that, we do have a motion on the floor presently. Can we withdraw that motion and then come back to it?
Yes.
Okay. So mover and seconder are happy to withdraw motion for 9.1, and we'll go to 9.2, and then we can come back. All right. Thank you, Councillor Cannon, moving 9.2. Need a seconder for that motion. Councillor Wallace-Richmond, thank you. Administrator, if you would read the motion, please.
Moved by Councillor Cannon, seconded by Councillor Wallace-Richmond, that the bylaw entitled Transportation Parcel Tax Amendment Bylaw number 4330 be read a first, second, and third time.
Thank you. I have two speakers from previous, Councillor Lavery, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Lavery, or Councillor Flynn, would you like to speak?
I'll raise it till next.
Defer, okay. Any questions or comments around this item 9.2? Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. A few quick questions for staff, and I have to say, as I was, and I'm not going to reinvent the wheel here. I was away in March when Council had this discussion on the parcel transportation tax. I think I know the answer to this, but just so I'm clear to staff through you, Your Worship, the timeline to ratify this to be included in the tax mail-out is very short. Is that not?
Yes, Your Worship.
The mail-out is going.
It needs to be approved with the tax rates.
Thank you. So I'm certainly mindful of the time here at this table, as well as the timeline for getting the tax notices out. I just want to ask one quick question, and I'm going to come back to it in my remarks, Your Worship, about the parcel tax itself. But just a question through you to staff. Can a transportation parcel tax be based on assessed value?
Director, our Chief Financial Officer.
The parcel tax can be based on one of three methods. It can be based on a single amount per parcel. It can be based on the taxable area of the parcel, or it can be based on the taxable frontage of a parcel.
And as a follow-up to that, the taxable area, is that something that's easily achieved? And I just want to clarify, I'm not talking about impeding this process here today, but this is general information. The assessed area version, is that easy to determine?
I would need some time to evaluate that, to look at the change. It would definitely be a large project to have that switched over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I understand that. And again, I'm not, Your Worship, talking about that today here. I have some comments on this, but maybe I'll just back off until other people have questions, and I'll come in on the comment portion.
Okay, thank you. It's got us all thinking. Other questions? Okay, I have a couple of questions. So are all parcels pay, including strata? Farm parcels do not pay the parcel tax, is that right?
Your Worship, a farm that has a residential dwelling pays the parcel tax. The exemptions that are included within this bylaw exempt Class 9 only land, which are considered, or at the time were considered by council to be an extension of the existing farm, and are land only. And so that second parcel, if you will, is exempt. And then the other piece of the Class 1 farm buildings are exempt under other sections of the Act. And because of them we've kind of assessed them similar to being kind of land only. They'd be farm buildings, outbuildings used for purposes, and that's determined by BC assessment.
Okay, so Class 9 is only farms that do not have residential houses on them.
Yeah, Class 9 only land, yes.
Okay, and those are the only ones that are exempt as far as farms go.
And Class 9 farms with Class 1 farm buildings.
Okay, yeah, so
Yes.
no residents.
That's right.
Got it, okay. The other questions I have are around Schedule 2. And thank you, I found it very useful to have comparisons done both for residential and commercial properties, basically assessments and what the increase would be if we went to a ad valorem versus a parcel tax. So if we go to page 83 at the bottom, based on a commercial property assessed at $500,000, if we did not do the parcel tax but went to the ad valorem, which would equal 1.37% increase, that commercial property would pay for this year $48 more. Is that correct? Okay. If we did the whole amount as a ad valorem tax, which would be a 5.47 ad valorem tax increase. Would you multiply 48 by 5 to figure out what the increase would be to that $500,000 assessed commercial property?
Yes, I think that would work, yeah.
Okay, yeah, you do 5.47. So that would be about an increase of about $240 for each $500,000 assessment for commercial property.
The $48 increase is already based on 500,000.
Right?
Yeah,
But that's based on just this year's $30 increase to the parcel tax.
yes.
Okay, so, but the $150 parcel tax total for a $500,000 commercial property would equal $240 difference if you went to ad valorem versus parcel tax.
If you made it a total ad valorem, is what you're saying? Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. That was what I thought. And conversely, if we went to the residential side, say a $300,000 dwelling, which is below, I think, the average in the city, but their taxes would decrease $13 if we did the ad valorem 1.37% and did not do the $30 parcel tax.
That's correct.
So if you didn't do the parcel tax at all, the 150, and you transferred it to ad valorem, it'd be 1341 times 5.47, which is about $65. Okay. So, okay, I understand. I'll comment later. Okay, any other questions around this before we get to comments? Councillor Flynn.
Mine's comment.
Okay, I don't see any other names up here. I'll just give one more chance for questions. Okay, go ahead with your comments and then we'll enter other comments as well.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will vote in favor of the motion. I feel the increase to the transportation parcel tax is a reasonable one. I still strongly support the concept of the transportation parcel tax, but I will say that I'm thinking it's approaching its highest amount we could charge. I think the intent to shift a certain amount of guaranteed money to asphaltic overlays is very important. Those were always what was cut first and never funded to the level they should, and still not funded to the level they should be. But I feel that somewhere between 150 and maybe someday it could be higher, but I think this is a fair way to handle everybody's equal access to our transportation network. If we were to move it to ad valorem, I would want us to look at decreasing the multiplier, and I think it's simpler to just do it this way. Businesses do get to write off their taxes, but you have to make money to write off taxes, and I think using the transportation parcel tax to charge everybody equally for the equal opportunity to access the roads is fair. And I think moving it to ad valorem would be moving backwards. So I support this. I'm not sure how much higher it can go, but if it's providing $1 million or thereabouts towards asphaltic overlays of guaranteed funding, I think it meets its need. And if we need more, then perhaps that comes from a bigger ad valorem tax increase in the future. So I will vote in support.
Thank you. Councillor Lavery.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. And again, as you said, thanks to staff for those that information on page 82, 83, and 84. I think it was really helpful in terms of possession. I am going to vote in favor here today of doing this because we clearly, the message we've had for a while is we need to combat road deterioration, and it's really much worse than we anticipated. So I'm in favor of it. And I also fully agree that there needs to be an annual sustained funding program. So I agree with that we've fallen behind and that we need to do more. And I unfortunately agree as well that history shows that politicians are usually not very good at adequately funding these functions over time. I'm sure it's this table accepted, but on the regular annual basis, taking it out of general revenue has been a problem. I also recognize that it's really difficult to come up with a proxy measurement for usage. So when we talk about our water system with residences that are not on meters, we use a proxy. And I'm not arguing for a frontage, but the dilemma is what proxy does one use for a tax? And I would say really clearly that, and I've felt this for a long time, and this has been the first opportunity it comes up, this is a regressive tax. And in my view, with all due respect to other opinions here, I think it's one of the more egregious examples of it. I agree with the rationale that we need to, again, have sustained annualized investment in the roads system. I disagree with the equality rationale that this has been based on. And again, I don't mean to criticize individual positions. Equality is not equity. And I think the idea of everyone uses the transportation infrastructure and therefore everyone should contribute misses the mark in terms of what taxation should be. I don't want to get overly dramatic about it. The report that we had coming in, a retired pensioner who drives their car to go to medical appointments and to shopping pays the same amount as a large retailer with a large space. And in my view, that's the definition of regressive. And I get that it's difficult to come up with a parameter, a proxy to measure this. And I don't have an answer here right now, Your Worship. But I think, and it's easy for us, and again, I'm not being derogatory about that, it's easy for us to take a parcel, because we can do that. We can calculate that really easily and apply it. But I would suggest that all proxies are problematic, and I would suggest that ad valorem is a better proxy than what we have seen before and what we have had in place for a while. So as I mentioned, I'm going to support this today. In the next while, I'm going to ponder a notice of motion so that we can consider this again well in advance of the budget process for next time. There's been ideas here I haven't thought about before. Maybe it's a combination of general budget and property tax, but that we do have a fulsome discussion heading into the budget process for next year. I personally think that we need, however we do it, to put an annualized increase in this. This is all the data that we have in front of us here. And the data, it's not finalized, but I think that the early indications of the data is we've got a bigger problem than we thought we had and that we need to do with it. And I'm thinking that $130 now is not sufficient. So I'm thinking of, Your Worship, I just as a heads up, potential notice of motion, and staff will, or excuse me, this table will determine whether you want to go further with that discussion, but that we look at targeting increases over the next couple of years, and we look at options to make this a less regressive tax. So I fully recognize that's a council decision that we need. I hope we revisit it, and I will vote in favor here today.
Great, thank you. Councillor Cannon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I support the parcel tax, and I think the increase isn't that much, and I don't think that I think it could even be a little bit higher, but I'm fine with it. And I support the idea of it not being based on ad valorem, because I think that when you look at how much commercial properties pay compared to residential, I don't think the asphaltic overlays should be totally put on the commercial properties. It shouldn't be put on their backs. I think that the way that we've done it here with the parcel tax, the residents and each parcel paying equal is, I totally support that. I think it's a fair route to go. But I look forward to your notice of motion in the future of how you think that it should be figured out.
Thank you, Councillor Cannon. Any other councillors wish to talk to this? Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. I too will be supporting this increase. I feel that we know that parcel taxes are complex to set up, and it's been in place for some time, and this is only just catching us up and not even quite that much. But I agree with both my colleagues that there's advantages and disadvantages to both. All taxes, by their nature, have equity issues with them. But the important thing is we need to get our roads fixed and up to a standard. We seek a better standard, and that's going to cost money. And I will discuss how, who, when, but I will not. I think by not having an annualized increase in this, we've sort of put our own foot in it. And I'm looking forward to future conversations, and hopefully that notice of motion will get us to explore the issue further, but we still need to spend the money and get the work done.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn.
Yeah, the other thing I just wanted to mention quickly is we haven't seen, as Councillor Wallace-Richmond mentioned, this was implemented 2003. I don't think we changed the number for a long time, and probably subsidized from ad valorem tax to support the level of the programs that we're doing on transportation. And this is only the second rate increase in 16 years. And perhaps it needs to be indexed, and that's something to think about. But again, I support it this time. I'm not sure it can go much higher unless it's an indexing to inflation.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, thank you, councillors, for all of your comments, and I think the quality of the discussion is very high. I think you've made most of the points. As a couple of councillors have stated, that we have not increased the parcel tax since 2009. In the meantime, the cost of asphalt and the labor to put it down on the roads has increased. So we've actually been doing less work over time. So this is a timely time to increase. It's never easy to increase taxes. The fact that these taxes are targeted, I think, makes it more easily understood, and that the public knows, okay, that $30 that I am paying increase this year is going towards roads only. So that's an important piece, I think. I look forward to discussion about taxation because it's an interesting topic, and fairness is difficult to measure. No doubt this parcel tax is an incentive for commercial and industrial property. That's why it was put in place. And the thought behind it is that light industry out in our industrial park and businesses in the downtown employ people, are valuable, we want to attract them, and this is an incentive that can help. And so for me at this time at least, I think the method that we're using is appropriate, but I would certainly be open to discussions in the future. I feel similar to Councillor Flynn that if we adjusted the parcel tax, we would have to look at the ad valorem piece. And that makes me nervous because, as Councillor Lavery said, councils have not always targeted ad valorem collected taxes into a specific use like roads. So I will also vote in favor of the motion today. Any other comments? All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you, and thank you for suggesting we move that up. We can go back to item 9.1. And we did have, or could I have the same mover and seconder, Councillor Lavery, Councillor Wallace-Richmond? You're comfortable with that? And I'll have the motion read one more time so we're back on track. Thank you, Administrator.
Moved by Councillor Lavery, seconded by Councillor Wallace-Richmond, that the following bylaws be read a first, second, and third time. City of Salmon Arm 2019 to 2023 Financial Plan Amendment Bylaw number 4322, and City of Salmon Arm 2019 Annual Rate of Taxation Bylaw number 4323.
Thank you. Chief Financial Officer.
Would you like me to speak again about it?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I forgot what you said last time.
No problem. So this budget amendment reflects 2019 assessments and taxes, carry forward projects from 2018, and tax requisitions from other governments, as well as council resolutions made thus far and budget reallocations. So this budget reflects a 3.3% tax increase as approved by council, as well as new construction revenue of 2.1%. It equalizes the tax rates between Class 5 and Class 6, as per council resolution in 2017, and it also includes the $30 increase of the transportation parcel tax.
Great, thank you. Questions from council? Comments from council? Councillor Wallace-Richmond?
Thanks, Your Worship. I didn't want to miss the opportunity to draw our attention to page 67 on the bottom. Just a moment to pause and remember our permissive tax exemptions represent $1.2 million of foregone revenue, which gives our nonprofits, churches, senior centers, sports clubs, and other, I'm not sure what other is, an opportunity to do their work. I'm very grateful for that, but I often hear, what is the city doing and how can the city contribute? But this is a significant number, and we need to remember to point it out when the opportunity arises. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace-Richmond. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Worship, and thank you for bringing page 67 up, because I think, as I believe Your Worship said at a previous meeting when he was educating all of us, that this is probably the most important page. One, for the permissive tax exemptions, and two, for people to understand that there is a significantly higher multiplier for industry and business and major industry. And the percentage contributed by of our total tax by residences is still by far the highest, but considering the number of businesses compared to property assessment, businesses pay a significant portion. So I think it's important that we have competitive multipliers, and I think, as I stated, if we ever did change the way we collect for our transportation network and our asphaltic overlays, I would want to revisit the multiples. So this is really good information, and the overall tax increase was about 3.3, is that correct, for the ad valorem?
Yes, a 3.3%.
And 1% generates how much revenue, approximately? 170, is it?
Yeah.
It's around 170, okay, that's close enough. So we're generating about, based on just the tax increase, about $500,000 more of revenue, a little bit more than that. And I think through the budget process, we did a great job making sure we found ways to spend that and supporting staff and community initiatives. It's a complicated process. Is fourth reading what's planned for Thursday, the special council meeting?
Yes.
Okay, that's what that is. But I do want to mention that it's all one taxpayer, and the fact that about $100,000 of our increased tax bill is the double dip for employer health tax this year. So don't kid yourself, you're still paying for MSP, it's just done in a different manner in your cost of your taxation here and in your cost of goods for businesses and things like that. So that was just a shift. Now you're paying for it through this taxation. So great job, staff. Thank you for all the information, and we could go talk about taxes forever. I can't wait for those future discussions, Tim.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. I just had a couple of comments. First of all, on the first page, the second paragraph down that starts with the property tax increase. I'm trying to understand that paragraph. What I think, the equaling of the tax rate class 5 and 6, which we've talked about here. Here, there's class 6, there's a tax increase of $37.60 per 100,000, but a decrease of assessed value of $3.94 for 100,000. I'm trying to understand how that works. So how could the assessed value be decreased, but the actual tax per 100,000 increase?
Are you, sorry, Your Worship, are you talking about the the first sentence or the second?
The first and the second together?
So the first sentence relates to residential and business, has to do with just the property tax increase of 3.3%, the impact on 100,000. Whereas the second piece of that is then comparing the class 6 with the class 5 and the equalization of the rate. So they're two separate issues.
I get it. Okay, thank you. Now I understand. My second question is just about the federal gas tax and the promise of it being doubled. Have we normally get about 800,000, that means we should get 1.6 million this year. Have we heard anything from the federal government about the second share?
I don't have any final information as to what the city could expect to receive at this point.
Okay. Have we been contacted as far as the money is coming?
I have not.
Okay. All right. We'll wait just a bit longer.
Sure, and those monies wouldn't directly impact the budget. They would come in as a deferred revenue.
Yeah. No, I understand, but I just wanted to check. The last piece I wanted to talk about was on page 63. This is one that's probably we're all going to ask about. I think it's the third most important chart because it shows, first of all, the total consolidated expenditures at the bottom of 2019. So the city spends $37 million a year. And so then the next question people ask is, what do you spend it on? So number one is protective services, 6.2 million. So that's police, RCMP, and fire. Majority RCMP, but that's our number one expense. Number two is transportation services, which we talked about previously. Does that amount include the parcel tax, that 5.5 million?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. So 5.5 million we spend on roads and those kind of things. And then water service and sewer service at the bottom, if you add those two together, it's about 4.5 million, followed by recreation and cultural services, which is about 4.5 million. The revenues are not reflected in those consolidated expenditures, are they? So when I say recreation and cultural services, our expenditures are 4.5 million. That doesn't take into consideration the revenues that are gathered from that function?
For the recreation,
Yeah, or for any of them.
the funds that the recreation center generates themselves, that's right. Those would be any deficits or covers from the city, but it does not include the revenues generated.
Okay. And the reason I point that out is it can be misleading because protective services, for example, doesn't really have many revenues. That's just pretty well all expense. Whereas recreation and cultural services, we spend 4.5 million, but there's also substantial revenues that would offset that expenditure or deficit. So when people ask about how is the money spent, it's pretty clear on that line. That's my last comment. Thank you, councillors, for your comments and questions on that item. Any other questions at all or comments? I will call the question then. All those in favor? Thank you. Passes unanimously. Councillor Flynn, we're on to 9.3, City of Salmon Arm Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4334. We have a proposed motion. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Cannon, thank you. Second. Councillor Lavery. The administrator would read the motion, please.
Moved by Councillor Cannon, seconded by Councillor Lavery, that the bylaw entitled Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4334 be read a first, second, and third time, and that final reading be withheld subject to the following: registration of a Section 219 covenant, ensuring a detached suite is not permitted, and confirmation that the proposed secondary suite in the existing single-family dwelling meets zoning bylaw and BC Building Code requirements.
Thank you. Director of Development Services.
Your Worship, the property is located in Raven at 1230 52nd Avenue Northeast. It's presently zoned R1, single-family residential, and the proposal is to change the zoning to R8, residential suite zone. Council reviewed this property recently for a variance related to a subdivision to subdivide the property into 2 lots. That variance application was approved to reduce the panhandle width and to forego works and services along the fronting street. And if this property is rezoned to R8, then the owners agree to put a covenant on the property saying that there can be no detached suite permitted. And before final reading of the zoning bylaw, if it makes it that far, there would have to be confirmation that the existing secondary suite in the house meets BC Building Code.
Great, thank you. Council, any questions or comments on this item? Councillor Cannon.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just so I understand, it won't get rezoned until there's confirmation that the secondary suite in the existing is met BC Building Code.
Director of Development Services.
Through you, Your Worship, that's correct. When we are aware of a suite in a house where there's been no building permit and the zoning isn't correct, then we require that suite to basically meet code before it goes to final reading.
Thank you.
Okay, and I did notice that that property has a for sale sign on it, so if it gets sold in that process, it still gets collected that it gets done, correct?
Director of Development Services.
Yes, so depending on when it gets sold, if it is sold, we at the city follow our process in terms of the subdivision requirements, which haven't been met yet either. So the subdivision requirements are valid for a year, a little less now, because that letter was issued late last year. But regardless, whoever owns the property is subject to those requirements.
Okay. I was just curious because I know we had another one, if I remember correct, that someone purchased it and thought that it was a legal suite, but it wasn't. So it does follow it whether it's sold or not in the middle of this process.
Your Worship, the good point, and actually that property is on this council agenda, the one that you're talking about, Councillor Cannon. In that case, there was no application to rezone that property before the person purchased it.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Cannon. Any other comments or questions? All those in favor? Thank you. We'll move forward to 9.4. City of Salmon Arm zoning amendment bylaw number 4335. There's a motion on the screen. Need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Lavery, Councillor Wallace-Richmond, thank you. The administrator read the motion.
Moved by Councillor Lavery, second by Councillor Wallace-Richmond, that the bylaw entitled zoning amendment bylaw number 4335 be read a first and second time.
Thank you. Director of Development Services.
Your Worship, another application to rezone a property from R1 single-family residential to R8 residential suite zone. This property is located at 1441 20th Avenue Southeast. And at the meeting last Monday, at the Planning Committee meeting, the applicant handed staff a subdivision concept, which we weren't aware of right until that meeting day. And I'll show you what it looks like. It is not this one, this is an old subdivision concept that would have involved the subject property and the property to the east. And this concept would be for a fee simple subdivision with a city road, 18 meters wide and a cul-de-sac. The applicant came up with a concept for 7 Bearland strata lots in this long and narrow property, and he will be applying for subdivision. Whether the rezoning goes through or not, if it stays R1 single family residential, that would also work for this subdivision layout.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions? Okay, we had quite an extensive conversation at the planning committee meeting. Could I just ask if after public hearing, council chooses to rezone this property, it looks like the size of those lots that the suites would have to be within the house, or are they big enough to have a second separate dwelling?
Your worship, these proposed lots could not have a detached suite. They're about 450 square meters, which is the minimum.
Okay. All right, that's helpful to know, thank you. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Worship. So if we approve first and second reading and go to public hearing to R8, and then if after public hearing we approve R8, all the lots in the subdivision, the council's done at that point and it's up to staff to approve the subdivision. And all of them potentially could be suites if we approve R8 for the whole piece at this point in time.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? This is first and second reading today. All those in favor? Thank you. We'll move forward to public hearing with that. Item 9.5, City of Salmon Arm zoning amendment bylaw number 4336. First and second reading. We have a motion. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Flynn, Councillor Cannon, thank you. Administrator, would you please read the motion?
Moved by Councillor Flynn, seconded by Councillor Cannon, that the bylaw entitled zoning amendment bylaw number 4336 be read a first and second time.
Thank you. Director of Development Services.
Your worship, this is an application by the Development Services Department to amend the city zoning bylaw by including the definition assisted living housing in the R4 and R5 zones. Also to raise the density for that use in each zone in accordance with the official community plan density limits. And also, if this is approved, then there is a corresponding proposal by BC Housing and Canadian Mortgage and Housing Association for a project on 250 Fifth Avenue Southwest. That property is zoned R5. Most of the units proposed in that development would be multifamily, presently allowed in the R5 zone. If this zoning amendment is adopted, then there's likely going to be a component of assisted living housing, possibly 40 units. And if you would like, I can show you, just to refresh your memory, last summer, council approved a development permit for 3 buildings on this property, 35 units in 2 of the buildings and 27 units in 1 of the buildings. That development permit is still valid, and if any development occurs on the property, it has to be consistent with that development permit.
Thank you very much. Councillors, do you have any questions or comments at this time? Okay, we also had extensive conversation about this at planning. This is first and second reading. All those in favor? Passes unanimously.
Your worship, can I ask you something? There is a letter attached to this item from the applicant requesting a contribution from the city, from the city's Affordable Housing Fund.
Yes, I noticed the letter. I didn't think it was applicable necessarily to the motion.
Okay.
I'll just ask the administrator if he would like us to address the letter now.
Your worship, I think it's premature to do that.
Okay, all right. So we will keep that letter as information for the time being, given that the motion is a text amendment brought forward by the city. Okay, let's move forward then to 9.5. Or 9.5, City of Salmon Arm zoning amendment bylaw 4336, 96, City of Salmon Arm industrial revitalization tax exemption amendment bylaw. We have a motion on the screen. There it is. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Lindgren, second. Councillor Wallace-Richmond. The administrator would read the motion, please.
Moved by Councillor Lindgren, seconded by Councillor Wallace-Richmond, that the bylaw entitled Industrial Revitalization Tax Exemption Amendment Bylaw number 4337, we read a first, second, and third time. And that final reading be withheld, subject to fulfillment of the public notice requirement as set out under sections 97 and 227 of the Community Charter.
Thank you. Director of Corporate Services.
Thank you, Your Worship. Industrial Revitalization Tax Exemption Bylaw number 4020 is set to expire on June 23rd, 2019. Bylaw number 4337 proposes to extend the date to May 12th, 2024. All other terms and conditions would remain the same. If Council chooses to make changes, a full analysis will be required.
Great, thank you. Councillors, questions or comments? Councillor Flynn?
I'm just trying to understand the maps at the start. Schedule A, map 1, is showing 2 industrial areas that would be eligible if they applied.
That's correct.
So that's the west of town, and then both west of town across from Smart Centers.
That's correct.
Okay, I understand those 2. This one, map 2.
Mm-hmm.
Can you clarify where that is?
The Director of Development Services has a little hand, so I'll pass it over to him.
Your Worship, this is out in Canoe, and it's the Canoe Mill property.
Oh, that's why. I'm looking at it and I see a wharf kind of there and I'm going, why would we have industrial on our waterfront? Okay, thank you. And then this one, clearly I understand that one. I'm glad and will vote in favor of this. It's too bad if you look at how little it's been taken advantage of. So I think we really need to make sure businesses in our industrial park are aware of this and know how to apply for it, because we have actually, because of a lack of understanding, I think, or knowledge of the bylaw, have created a negative that should have been a positive in the past. So I hope we make sure we get this out to the community if we approve it. I think it's a very good thing to do, similar to what's been done downtown for Revite.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Other comments? Okay, thank you for bringing that up, Councillor Flynn. So I agree with you, and whenever I go and speak about things, I always speak about this industrial revitalization tax exemption and the opportunity. And I think the cycle is now, we have had more interest in the last year than we have in the previous 5. And we have application and we have interest. And so I think this can be a very useful incentive to attract business to our industrial park. So I would encourage council to vote to extend this another 5 years. Any other comments? All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we're at 10-1. I think we can squeeze 10-1 in before delegations. So we have a motion. This is a long motion, but it's one that we're very familiar with. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Flynn, Councillor Cannon, thank you. I'll have the administrator read the motion.
Moved by Councillor Flynn, second by Councillor Cannon, that the following bylaws be read a final time. Financial Plan Bylaw number 4312, Equipment Replacement Reserve Fund Expenditure Bylaw number 4313, Police Protection Vehicle and Equipment Reserve Fund Expenditure Bylaw number 4314, Fire Protection Emergency Apparatus Reserve Fund Expenditure Bylaw number 4315, and General Capital Reserve Fund Expenditure Bylaw number 4316.
Great, thank you.
Sorry, Your Worship, there are some more.
Yes, I don't think we're finished the list yet.
Development Cost Charge Drainage Reserve Fund Expenditure Bylaw number 4317. Development Cost Charge Road Reserve Fund Expenditure Bylaw number 4318. Development Cost Charge Water Reserve Fund Expenditure Bylaw number 4319. Development Cost Charge Sewer Reserve Fund Expenditure Bylaw number 4320. And Cemetery Columbarium Reserve Fund Expenditure Bylaw amendment bylaw number 4321.
Thank you. It's a long one. Chief Financial Officer, would you like to comment?
Thank you, Your Worship. This final motion will adopt the bylaws to amend the 2018 budget based on our year-end results, as well as authorize expenditures from the various statutory reserve funds based on projects that were included within the budget.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions or comments? Okay, we've discussed this a number of times. I think everyone's familiar. I will call the question. All in favor? Passes unanimously, and thank you to the Finance Department for their work. Okay, we are now going to move to presentations and delegations because it's 4 o'clock, and we'll come back to informational correspondence after that. So, item 13. Derek Sutherland. Hi Derek, nice to see you. Thank you for coming and talking to us about protective services.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the invite to come and speak to you today. So we have a great program. We like to speak about it. So
thank you very much.
It's me here. Okay, thank you. Right. Yeah, so thank you, Your Worship, and members of council and members of staff. We were asked to come here today to provide a deeper understanding of the Shuswap Emergency Program. The Shuswap Emergency Program is a shared program between the City of Salmon Arm, the District of Sicamous, and the electoral areas C, D, E, and F of the CSRD. And the program is managed directly by the CSRD for all those electoral areas and municipalities. So the origins of CEP. This CEP was realized after the 1998 wildfire, the Silver Creek wildfire, where 7,000 people from the City of Salmon Arm had to be evacuated. I'm told that at the time it was the largest evacuation due to wildfire in Canadian history. And it really speaks to how emergency management is changing well, globally and certainly in our areas, where now we have evacuation of 80,000 people from the city of Fort McMurray, and the evacuations that we've seen in British Columbia in 2018 and 2017. This number was a very large number in 1998, and it's no longer a very large number. So, but it was after this wildfire that the City of Salmon Arm, the District of Sicamous, and the CSRD all said we need a better plan. And the powers that be at that time got together and decided that a regional approach would be the most effective way of establishing an emergency program for the Shuswap area. So the three agencies collaborated and they came up with the Shuswap Emergency Management Program, or SEMP at the time. Eventually we dropped the management from the name, and it just became SEP. The amalgamated program takes advantage of some economies of scale by having just one emergency program coordinator and one part-time emergency management facilitator who acts as our ESS director as well. And those people are here with me today. So Kathy Semchuk is our emergency management facilitator. And
welcome, Kathy. Nice to have you here.
And Tom Hansen is our emergency program coordinator.
Great to have you here, Tom.
So without the amalgamated program, each area or municipality would likely have their own emergency program coordinator, and for the size of our municipalities and our areas, those positions would likely be full-time. We would also have an ESS director that for each of the communities, and a lot of times we see those as stipend positions for the municipalities and for the electoral areas. So by combining, we're able to have 1.5 positions that fulfill all those needs. And we find that a lot of our hazards, you know, cross these jurisdictional boundaries and without regard for what we think. So we're able to deal with them effectively through the CSRD and the District of Sicamous in the City of Salmon Arm. So through the consolidated efforts, we have a very strong program, and in addition to sharing staff, we share an emergency plan, a volunteer team, structure protection units, and a mobile command center, to name a few. And we're also very proud that we're recognized, our program is recognized as leaders in the province, and the province turns to our program for assistance when they need it. So we'll talk a little bit about that later in the presentation. So the boundaries of SEP are east to Three Valley Gap, north to Seymour Arm, and you'll see that on the map there. There's a lot of area between Seymour Arm and the district boundary, but there's not very many people up in there. So usually we say Seymour Arm's kind of the boundary. And south to Falkland, which would be our last kind of area, populated area in Area D, and then west to just a tip of Adams Lake and Dorian Bay, which is in the CSRD Area F. So, and then of course the municipal boundaries of Sicamous and Salmon Arm. So to understand kind of what we do and how we work, it's important to understand, you know, what disasters are and what emergency management is. So essentially disasters need two elements to exist. They need the realization of a hazard intersecting with a population or a populated area. So without people, we can have all the landslides and floods and fires and train derailments, but they're not a disaster. They're a realization of a hazard. So emergency management is the managerial function that reduces the vulnerability by preparing and responding for serious events. So we use the 4 pillars of emergency management seen here as a framework for providing our communities with or providing service to our communities. So, and those are prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. So, and all of our time, 100% of our time can be captured by this framework. So we're always operating in one of these pillars. So in Salmon Arm, we've had some notable responses in recent history. In 2018, we had the Salmon River flooding, and this picture depicts the DeMills at high water last year. And SEP worked with EMBC and BC Wildfire to get gabion baskets and sandbags to residents. We were lucky enough to get 3 or 4 wildfire or contract crews from the province at the province's expense to help us mitigate against floodwaters for our critical infrastructure. And we worked with Rob on protecting the sewage treatment plant down in Canoe from the lake flooding, and we put some gabion baskets around the mills here. And we were able to get crews in to help with that effort, and when they were done with the critical infrastructure, they were able to move on to residential and really help some of our most vulnerable residents prepare for these emergencies. And I mean, Tom and I were driving down Salmon River Road in Area D, and we saw a couple that were at least in their 80s trying to fill sandbags and get this stuff going. So it was really nice to be able to bring in those wildfire crews and help out people like that who really needed the support. And they had a little cardboard sign outside saying, come help fill sandbags, everybody's welcome. So, but you could tell they were really struggling. So in 2017, we had 4 separate road washouts in Salmon Arm. We assisted city staff with acquiring the resources they needed to deal with the situation through funding through EMBC, then assisted with the financial submissions to the Disaster Financial Assistance Program and Emergency Management British Columbia. So in 2017 and 2012 and 2018, We manage the response to significant late flooding and each of our provincial governments. And like we said before, this is really where the program flourishes, because when things are flooding in Salmon Arm, they're flooding in Blind Bay, and they're flooding in Sicamous. So, and Sicamous has that downtown core that's kind of low-lying. So, and then we have critical infrastructure here in Salmon Arm that's low-lying. So we can coordinate a response from one emergency operations center with one set of staff without competing priorities. And you know, we know that that critical infrastructure must be protected. We know that people must be kept safe, and we're able to manage that from one EOC, which is really nice. So, in addition to the major events, we provide support to individuals that are displaced from their homes, usually after a fire or a flood. So our ESS is always on call, and when Chief Shirley has a fire here in Salmon Arm, he can call our ESS and make sure that the residents in that home are taken care of with their most basic needs of food, shelter, and security. So emergency management's all about building community capacity to anticipate, prepare, and react to emergencies. Through this process, we become more resilient to disasters and reduce vulnerabilities within our communities. Some of the ways we do that are creating and maintaining an all hazards emergency plan, developing and reviewing hazards, risk, and vulnerability assessment on a yearly basis, recovery planning, emergency support services planning, emergency exercises, and we're currently planning for 2 upcoming emergency exercises, one of which is at the Salmon Arm Airport to fulfill the requirements of NAV Canada to exercise regularly. The other one is to test the new EOC facility at the CSRD main office. We also spend a great deal of our time relationship building. It's always better to shake hands before an event than it is during an event, and know our partners. We relationship build in both a formal and informal way. We meet regularly with the SEP Advisory Committee, which a number of you are part of. That's a political committee comprised of elected officials from each of our partner municipalities in our electoral areas. We also have regular interagency meetings, which are designed to bring industry partners around a table to discuss ongoing issues and updates on activities in their respective disciplines. As an emergency program, we liaise with our provincial partners from EMBC, MOTI, Flinrord, and Interior Health to help provide the resources that we need during an emergency activation. Big part of our program is social services. We're very proud of the team that Kathy has built. Currently, our program has 86 volunteers that provide ESS services in one form or another when we have an activation. These volunteers are regularly activated to respond to individual house fires and floods like we spoke about, but they also provide valuable support during large-scale events like the evacuations of Ashcroft, Williams Lake, 100 Mile House, to name a few. In 2017, we activated at the Prestige to handle some of the load of evacuees that were in our area. We had a number of evacuees come to the Salmon Arm area because they had connections to this community, and those people were having to go to Kamloops every 3 days to renew their evacuation status and get supports. We opened up within 3 weeks. We put approximately 900 people through our evacuation center, and that took a lot of pressure off of Kamloops, and it also allowed those people to travel a much shorter distance to get their services that they needed. So, also we our ESS team are leaders in the province, and the 3 ladies that you're seeing up there up in Burns Lake in this picture, and they were asked to go up there by EMBC last year when Burns Lake needed some assistance with their evacuation. So we have a number of special teams within the CSRD and SEP, and They are the Structural Protection Unit, the Emergency Operations Center Volunteer Corps, and the Mobile Operations Unit. So the Structural Protection Unit has just been a hugely successful program. We have 3 of these structure protection units or sprinkler trailers. So they have sprinklers and pumps and hose that we use to protect homes during interface wildfire issues. 2 of them are in the Shuswap. We have 1 in the Columbia region in Revelstoke and Golden. And when we're not using them here, we're able to deploy them provincially, and the province pays us to have those resources deployed. The result is that we get a very well-trained staff of SPU technicians, and we also get the money from these deployments gets to go back into the program, and we can use it for upgrades to the trailers, or we can look at expanding the program with that. So the mobile operations unit is a big 5-ton truck that's outfitted with meeting tables and office tables and wired for sound and data that we can use in the field as a mobile emergency operations center or a command post. So, and then the EOC team is a team of volunteers that helps take the pressure off of us during an emergency by coming and fulfilling positions in the EOC. So, in an event, I don't know where this came from. Oh no, that's right, sorry. So in an event, we'll work with each of our electoral areas and municipalities to ensure excellence in emergency management services before, during, and after an event. When we work with the city, we will work with responders, residents, and visitors to get them the resources they need, and we'll work in conjunction with the city to staff the EOC. We will ensure the paperwork is in order to receive financial compensation from Emergency Management BC, and we'll liaise with our provincial partners to add capacity. We'll arrange all the necessary resources to facilitate an evacuation as well. So, and last but not least, of course, we'll implement our emergency plan in whole or in part. So, and that's the end of our formal presentation. So, if you have any questions, we'll be happy to take them.
Thank you very much. Councillor Flynn, did you press your button? All right, Councillor Flynn.
Thank you. Not questions specifically because I'm fairly familiar with the program, but I do want to thank you and your team for coming here, and Chief Shirley as well. I asked to have you come and present because I was shocked during this election campaign and at our all candidates how few people know how extensive, first of all, that how few people know that we have an emergency management program or an emergency program, and 2, how few people understand how vast and deep it goes. Mm-hmm. And having been here for a few emergencies and experienced them, I don't think anybody understands how strong our ESS team is and what services they can provide. And just to make it really clear, this is a multi-jurisdictional approach that is a model provincially. And we are really lucky to have the team that we have and the structure that we have to share this risk. So I'm glad you came and presented. I'm sure others have questions. The one question I had is, one of your last slides was political involvement. I'm guessing when there's an emergency, you want as little political involvement as possible, or?
Quite often we'll ask that the politicians become the face of the emergency, and quite often if there's an event in Salmon Arm, we'll work with the Salmon Arm staff, and they may ask you to get in front of a camera and speak on behalf of the city in that regard, or on behalf of SEP as part of the SEP committee. So it's important that it's very important to me, to Tom, and to Kathy to keep you guys apprised of what's going on out there, because you're the face of the city within your communities. People are coming to you and looking to you for leadership. And when you say, I don't know what's going on with the lake flooding, or I don't know what's going on with the fire, it's not good. They need to have that confidence that everybody that is leading this knows what's going on. So we're committed to making sure that so you can impart the knowledge to your constituents.
And from our table, our SEP team is yourself,
Councillor Lavery?
Councillor Lavery, and then staff is significantly involved, I'm assuming.
The fire chief, for example.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you, and thank you for what you do, and I guess best thing with you is if we don't hear from you, that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So it just, unfortunately, if you don't hear from us, then sometimes we need to do things like this to make sure that you know about us and what we're doing and the work that we're doing on a daily basis. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Okay, Derek, I'm wondering if it would be possible to send that PowerPoint to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe staff have a copy. Yeah.
Okay, I would like to have it. That would be great. I'm not sure if Councillor Lavery wants to make a comment or not, but I've certainly enjoyed my little time that I've had on SEP because I'm just starting out and I'm learning a lot. And certainly, I think I can echo Councillor Flynn's comments that we, in the City of Salmon Arm, we work closely with you and we appreciate you reaching out, working not just with the fire chief, but with other staff. I did share with you in the flood last year, 2018, of the Salmon River, as a city councillor here, I felt like I really knew what was going on because we were getting almost daily emails from you showing the graphs, showing where things were at, and that was really helpful. Good. Because you're right, people ask us and say, where's the river at? Where's, what's the forecast? So to have the factual information was very helpful. I appreciated that communication.
You're very welcome. Yeah.
Okay, thank you to your team. Thanks, Kathy and Tom, for coming as well, and to our fire chief. All right, we will move onwards.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, our second presentation. I see Phil is here. Nice to see you. Welcome. Please come forward. Welcome to council. We, as you know, Phil, we had this report in front of us, but we really felt like we needed to have you here to sort of lead us through it and then to have an opportunity to ask any questions we might have.
Yeah, I'll do my best. Mayor, council, staff, thanks for the opportunity. I think you received January 24th, so the end of January. And so I won't go into detail on the report. I think you've had a good look at it, and there was some good follow-up media PR on it as well, I think, which was great to see. And also, just I'll acknowledge that it was great to see the recommendation that had come suggesting that the nesting closure period for dogs along the Foreshore Trail moved by 2 weeks, and so that's implemented and is underway. So those recommendations are there, and so I won't go into detail. You've acknowledged that there was a slight slip in overall compliance, particularly in terms of folks using leashes compared to before, and that based on our monitoring plan, the adaptive plan that we'd all worked on together and agreed to, it dropped below that 97% magic mark because we proved to ourselves in the first year that we actually could hit 100%. So 97 was a reasonable sort of flag or warning bell that maybe we need to do something just to remind everyone, bring people back up to 100% compliance. I do want to just acknowledge that there was good news in the surveys as well, right? Like we did see during the survey period less noticeable reports of folks with dogs into the foreshore off of the trail where they weren't supposed to be, and there was less feces on the trail. Why and how that's all, it may be folks coming behind others and picking up after them. It may be peer pressure, doesn't matter in terms of measuring and reporting during those the simple monitoring period that the summer students were able to manage. That's what was observed. So, and then there was a series of recommendations. So that's probably, I see the reports up there. I'm thinking maybe let's just pop right to the chase here and look at the summary of recommendations. Sorry, the previous page, that's that one there, yeah. So the bottom line was that corrective actions were necessary because we saw that acceptable limit of change pass, so it triggers the adaptive plan. And then, so we did pull the, because there's no formal monitoring committee in place or advisory, we pulled the advisory from the original study that was done, the original working group that was brought together, just to run this by them and say, what do you think? And certainly having talked to staff, the feeling was that this is an educational reminder moment. It's let's reinforce the signage, reinforce the reason this is happening, and do what we can on that level. But the advisory group did feel that it was important to bring back all the original recommendations, because there weren't just the one recommendation, but there was another set of recommendations, and put that before you again as the full set of plans. So you'll see two sections to the recommendations. The first section is the original recommendations. So that was what was originally recommended in 2017. And then you'll see the additional recommendations from the 2018 monitoring season, and you'll see implement appropriate responses to mitigate the noted decline in compliance, including ... So conduct a new round of public education, reminders, news releases, and info bulletins. Establish ongoing monitoring advisory to assist response to noted decline in compliance. So the suggestion here was, what was a working group that effectively is no longer formal or was disbanded, it might be helpful or would be helpful to continue having a community group that represents the different interests to be able to bring together, particularly for staff, should that be needed. To continue, so this is point 4, which I think is maybe the most important one for us to at least spend a bit of time on, is to continue the annual monitoring, including funding the summer survey, so that benchmark remains consistent. And I know there's been some discussion with the new animal control bylaw officer who's been hired, that person will be doing some interventions there as well. So there's some question about that, but the key to that recommendation is that the monitoring needs to be consistent. Even though it's really simple, it needs to be consistent so that we're measuring apples and apples and apples and apples, not sort of speculative. Is this similar to what we saw last year? So that's the recommendation, is that, and we've used the summer students who get hired at the Foreshore Nature Center, because they're there on a daily basis through the week, and taking an hour 5 times a week isn't onerous in their schedule. In fact, it actually kind of enhances giving them something focused to get out and interact a little bit more. And they've been really great at it. They've been very efficient and very swift and effective. So that's the bullet 4. Include the one suggestion was that the monitoring might start to include some early morning and some later evening monitoring times. There were some reports through the Trail Report hotline which suggested that when people walk their dogs before they go to work and in the evening after work, potentially, that there may be something different happening. And because most of the monitoring was happening between sort of 8:30 and 4 or 5 o'clock, it was hard to know what was happening before 8:30 and after 5 o'clock. So that's the one suggestion. And just talking to Sabnus, the suggestion was that they thought that they could actually work with the staff that they hire and suggest that 1 or 2 of the days each week, and it might fluctuate, that they might come in early or leave late and try and catch some of that monitoring, just so we can get a glimpse as to what's happening in those times. The next point was to shift the nesting closure to between May 1st and June 30th, which has happened. And then the last ones are really pulling from the original set of recommendations. One is to host the State of Bay conference in conjunction with the Habitat Management Plan. And you'll remember the State of the Bay conference was a recommendation from the original management plan for the Bay. And with the idea that on a regular basis, pull people together throughout the Bay and reflect on where we're at. And because Sabnus, the Nature Trusts, Ministry of Forest, Lands, Natural Resources are talking about redoing the management plan for the protected area, the thought was that might make a great opportunity to piggyback, even if it was just a day symposium together to do that in some form. So that's a recommendation that has some potential because of a partnership development happening. And then finally, to implement the habitat compensation plan, which you will recall was part of the original adaptive management plan. Given that we were all agreeing that there's risk, that we're not going to spend time debating or discussing whether dogs and people and wildlife have impacts on each other. We're going to say, yes, we know that happens. We know there's a risk here. We're going to manage that risk, and we feel that this is an appropriate level of management. It was also acknowledged that the nesting, any valuable nesting habitat directly along the trail corridor would in fact get impacted, that there would be some level of impact. And if we use the normal or the formal compensation model, those particular, we'd measure the particular amount of habitat and then compensate by creating improved habitat elsewhere. And so that was done. There was a monitoring study or a compensation study done that you'll remember Jeremy Ayotte did for us. And it wasn't onerous in the end. It wasn't a hugely outlandish recommendation. And I think it even, might be looking like $30,000 to $40,000 of compensation for those areas that were deemed, likely and observed important habitat. So that one sits there and it hasn't been addressed. I just, we wanted to bring that forward and just make sure, hey, listen, this is an unfinished action item from the 2017 strategy. And then the final one was to review city animal bylaw control program and assess how it might better support reporting. And I'm happy to let you know that I have had a chance to chat briefly with Bob Klein, who's the new coordinator. We're excited to meet each other in person, so I'm looking for the vehicle. And I understand that actually the easiest way to do that is to go down to the Foreshore Trail at some point most days, because he's actually built that into part of his regular show up and be present and routine. And I think at this point he said he's actually doing it 2 to 3 times a day. Just that's part of his routine on both ends of the trail. So, I really appreciated his energy and enthusiasm and keenness. The one note is I did ask what his record keeping was, and he's keeping a detailed record of his actions. So he keeps a journal. He did indicate, though, he said, interestingly, the city hasn't given me any formal outline in terms of record keeping for observations and things like that. So I think that's maybe a note to staff to, and again, that would sort of fit this bullet, it's an opportunity to just sit down and think formally about how we might do that for a trail system like that. He's not going and taking the formal survey and walking the whole trail. He's not doing that. So it's not an equal monitoring to what we were doing before. It's presence and influence. So in terms of mitigation actions, I would say that that's one mitigation action that's happening that wasn't happening before, and I think it'll be interesting to see how successful that is in terms of making it clear that no, actually we're serious about living in a bird sanctuary and serious about doing that exceptionally well. So I offer those recommendations to you on behalf of the reporting and the management plan. The final piece that's in the report, the final page, was just some budgeting, and it's really the budgeting that was carried forward from 2017. The one question that was raised with me was if we were to keep the monitoring going through the nature center and the summer students, is this the actual amount? And we'd built into the amount enough that we could actually expand it and actually do some evenings. And in the last 2 years, if they do once a week, and they usually, the hiring often starts late, so we ended up getting things going by June instead of May, so we lost a few weeks. So the reality was it's come to about $1,200, $1,200 to $1,300 each year over the last 2 years. So I think it would be reasonable to say that a minimal option would be to kind of rein that in and say, yeah, over a 12 to 14 week period, at least 5 times a week, a 1 hour survey. The students, as always, have been delightful to work with, because it's always great to work with people who are smarter than you are. And so I kind of got this complex spreadsheet and said, I'm like, oh yeah, that's an Excel spreadsheet, we know that stuff. And it comes back completely ready, right? The reporting is pretty much done for us. So in terms of extra time to kind of do the training, manage it, get the reporting together, what I suggested was that, if we kind of looked at about $1,800, so $1,300 or so to make sure we can cover their time, and then an additional $500 to kind of help cover the extra time it takes to report and do this kind of stuff. That you might be able to say, well, for $1,800 we could do that baseline monitoring. So that was one of the questions that had been asked. So I thought I'd bring that and say that I think we can tweak these numbers if there's some resources to allow that to happen. The recommendation from the advisory was that continuing the monitoring is important. It's actually part of the adaptive plan. That's how adaptive plans work. That monitoring component in some form with consistency is a key component. So I hope that's sort of helpful. And really, I think I'm here for questions. I do want to thank again the folks from the advisory, and even folks who were away were very, very committed and responded by email, and there was some good engagement back and forth. And Rod Bickford, who's also with the Greenway Liaison Committee, so has joined me to kind of just show that there's more than just me standing here. So.
Welcome, Rod. And I know of your involvement, and so we appreciate it.
Janet Aiken sends her regrets. She's, I think, currently traveling to Saskatchewan or something like that right now. So. Oh, and Joe also on that advisory, and also with the Greenway Liaison Committee. Thanks, Joe.
Joe, you're always here, so we just sort of, and it's great to have you here, Joe. I'll open it up to questions or comments from Council. Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thanks, Mayor Harrison, and thanks for the presentation, Phil. Thanks for coming. I know these are busy times for you right now.
Oh, listen, it's a privilege to do this.
And
no, seriously.
I wasn't laughing. How the conversation has changed in the past 3 years, and your collaborative approach, the group's collaborative approach in what was a very heated standoff environment, and we've come to where we are here now. So I just, Your Worship, I maybe just cut to the chase here. I think basically we, while I think, Your Worship, you did bring it up during budget time, we actually missed making any decisions on allocating any money for ongoing monitoring. We have a situation, as you've described, where we've got dog control here now, but I think it behooves us to continue on with the monitoring, and I would make a motion that we take $1,800 out of council initiative to accomplish this, if there's a seconder.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Lindgren. Do you wish to speak further to that motion, Councillor Lavery?
Data is data, and we've had good data from this, and I think we need to carry on at least. And then I've already, Your Worship, I mentioned to you, I've already jotted it down in September to make sure that we talk about this again in the budget process coming up. I just want to be I'm really thankful for the baseline that we've established, and now we have a conversation on baseline, and we have a conversation over 2 or 3 years, and I think the combination again of active presence down there in a number of vectors will be interesting to see.
Thank you. Speaking to the motion, Councillor Flynn.
I will support the motion. I was going to speak to other issues, but I'll wait.
Okay. Anyone else like to speak to the motion? Okay. I think we kind of missed it during the budget time, actually. Amidst all of the other things we were talking about, I don't think it was an intentional miss necessarily. I will call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay. Motion carries. Councillor Flynn, we'll pass to you.
Thank you, and thank you, Phil, for the report. And I am in support of the improved communication and signage and all of those things that have been talked about, and clearly in support of the motion to continue monitoring. I guess my only thought, and I know we're talking about the goal is 100% compliance, but 97% is acceptable. I would suggest that we're setting, the bar should be 100, but to say 97, when you look at the absolute numbers of how many dogs that is off leash, it isn't very many. And to me, the high risk observations like observed harassment and things like that are a more important issue. If we had 90% compliance of speed and red lights through the town, we'd be ecstatic. So I think of my career in sales, and you under-promise and over-deliver and you have happy customers. I think setting a threshold of 97% is setting us up for failure. And I agree that 100 is ideal, but I'd be more comfortable with 90 being the threshold. I see it's gone the wrong way a little bit, but in absolute terms, that's not very many dogs off leash, and it doesn't sound like in the reports that they're going well off the trail. It's somebody walking with a dog beside them on the trail. Not legal, but again, I think 90% is pretty darn good. So I think we're setting too high a threshold, an unrealistic threshold. And I think things have improved significantly there, but I think 95% is awesome. I don't think it needs to be 97, but just my own personal thoughts.
Did you want to respond, Phil, to that? Sure.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to, because it's great, actually, because that's exactly what the advisory group and certainly Kevin was part of the staff discussion. I think Rob was sat in on that a couple of years ago as well, and that's exactly what's the discussion. What's the number? What's the acceptable limit of change? And that's the point when adaptive planning always gets hard. Everyone loves the collaborative feeling. Everyone values is easy. Like, there isn't a single person at a table who will go, yeah, no, we don't care about the birds. We just want to do whatever we want to do. Because actually everyone really does care. It's the point where we hold ourselves to account and say, what's the line in the sand? Where are we going to hold our feet to the fire? What's good enough? And I would argue that this could be applied to highways. Because personally, I don't think one person dead on the highway because a car goes fast, and we know how to solve that. We just separate people in cars or slow the cars down. We know the answer. So why is like one person? That's not good enough. So the conversation here was similar. It was like, well, wait a minute. We know this is going to create impact. So no impact would be better. Maybe we should just get people out of there altogether. So that was the push-pull, right? And that was when it was heated. And so you could feel the energy. It was like, is like one too many, or is like 10 too many? Like, the reality is we can't even study or measure that. We don't really know that level of impact. So the real question is, what's an acceptable limit that we could measure that would be easy to do? And at the end of the day, what we're really monitoring is compliance. Can we do this or not? So if you remember the first year, the monitoring, really the question was, what's reasonable? What can we pull off? And there was real concern, because the dog walking community wasn't even convinced they could pull off 80%. Yeah. And the community that was looking at the habitat going, wait a minute, we got to do everything we can to protect this, because we keep adding new layers, and we're saying like 0% impact. So we monitored, and I think it came in at, correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, Joe, like what, 99-point-something%. And what we proved was that we actually could do it with the level of exposure and conversation and publicity. The reality was we actually proved that as a community in general, we were able to be pretty compliant. And it was just a snapshot, right? So this is just an hour in a small period of time. It's not looking at everything else. So there's other anecdotal information that still needs to be considered. Given all of that, and everyone kind of looked at it, the question was, what's the threshold where we go, wait a minute, we want to hold ourselves to 100% accountability? And everyone said, yeah, if we could do that, that would be great. So 97 was chosen because that was kind of the margin where we could see that first round, and it gave us a benchmark. And so the thought was, well, if we say 97%, it's at least a line that suggests we're kind of letting our guard down a little, slipping a little from that 100, right? 100 would be, like you're saying, too. I thought it was bold too. I thought, well, that's pretty cool. But that was from that advisory, which included strong opinions from a conservation point of view, strong opinions from allowing dogs, feeling that dogs could be managed in the area. So I think it's helpful to think of that 97 as an indicator that's just showing, wait a minute, we're letting our guard down a little bit, and we can actually pull ourselves up to 100% accountability. So yeah, it sets us up for failure, but really what it sets us up for is to keep going, oh, wait a minute, we got to pull up our socks. And that will never stop. But if we set it high, the bar continues to be high. So that's my argument. Okay. And but do hear me when I say, you're not alone in the conversation. That was very much, and it was a thoughtful conversation. So I would encourage you to stick with it, actually.
Knowing how collaborative you are, for you to be even arguing. But I should know better than to argue with you.
This is not arguing, it's just that this one was so central to the discussion.
Sharing of ideas is good.
No, thanks for asking.
Do you have any other questions, Councillor Flynn?
No, great report, thank you.
Okay. Councillors, do any of the councillors have questions? Phil, I had a couple. First of all, I think we really appreciated the information from the experts about shifting that closing of the trail. I noticed I ran there today, and we haven't got the signs changed yet. Is there a timeline when those dates will be changed on those signs?
Yeah, so the signs are getting printed as we speak at High Impact with the new dates. We just had to get the new dates and Kevin, the right phone number. Yeah, the right phone number. So, and I think we've all tested the phone number now. So I think Bob got calls from all of us checking to make sure it's the right number. So, those are getting printed and they'll go up for May 1st. So May 1st, and some of the Sabnus leadership have said they'll make sure it gets up, and I'm on redundancy backup. So if it doesn't get connected, we'll strap them up on both ends. I think the phone number does need to be changed on the permanent signs which are up. So
the permanent signs that are there now still say April 15 to June 15, right?
Yeah. So those that's I'm all I've got control over is the soft banners. The other signs that would really be Rob over to you guys, I think.
So where are we with those signs? Sorry.
We haven't received any directions to change those signs, unfortunately. We haven't gone forward to change them yet.
Okay.
We have no money.
Okay. Well, what I thought, this is sort of off topic a bit, what we did in the school district, when we changed the times for the school district signs, we just put a little thing, stuck it over there, and it was really quick and easy.
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
Could be. I just think it's important because it's important for people to know that what's on that sign is what's happening, and we don't want to give the wrong message.
Yeah, so it's consistent.
So,
yeah,
okay, that's just my side.
We can coordinate, and I can.
Okay, that would be great. Can the other piece that I want to ask just briefly about, Phil, is I'm wondering, I couldn't find in the report, could the number of dogs in non-compliance, I'm not talking about percentage, I'm actually talking about number of dogs, could that be as a result of there being more dogs being walked on the trail?
I'm not quite sure I'm catching the...
So say in 2017 there was 100 dog walkers on the trail, and in 2019 there's 200. What that would tell you is that, gee, if you had 5 dogs off leash in 2017, you're likely to have 10 off in 2019, just because there's twice as many. I'm just wondering if that's a possibility. I'm not saying it's a good thing, I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I think, again, this is where it gets tricky, and it kind of leads back to Kevin's question about the number, because we realize, wait a minute, there's nuances where we really just don't know.
Yeah.
Because there isn't the resources to find out. If we had more resources and could have someone down there to do interviews over time, or if there was a sort of more robust monitoring, we might have a better idea. So really all we have to work with is how many people walked the trail. Of those people walking, how many had dogs? And of those people with dogs, how many were compliant? And so it's really that simple. That's all we're doing here. It doesn't, unfortunately, I mean, there could be a lot of people walking a lot of dogs off leash in places we don't want them to be outside of the monitoring time or at other times of the year and stuff. This is a very limited site. So I would say really all should, based on the simplicity of this, if there's more people, the percentage should still be the same. There would be more dogs off leash, but it'd be the percentage should still show. So there was a slight increase in the number of dogs noticed this go round, and there was a decline which suggested more dogs than usual.
Okay. Now, I guess maybe I might have missed it in the data, but I could only find the 2018 numbers, 1,075 people using the trail, 120 dogs. There's probably a number like that for 2017, and I just couldn't find it in here. Anyway, you could, if you find it, or I'm sure you have that number somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, what we could do is just send you kind of the comparison.
I'd like to see that.
Time. Yeah.
The other pieces I wanted to comment on, I'm really glad that Derek Woodhurst has stepped forward, because I think it's great to have someone representing that segment as well, to sit on the advisory group. So thanks for him for volunteering. And I've seen Bob's car down there, 3 or 4 times. And so I think, like you say, the presence of that car that says commissioners on the side and dog control, it can't be a bad thing.
Oh, it's good.
I think it's good, and he does have good energy. I agree with you. So that's, I think, is a positive as well. The only other thing I was wondering about is, I know we talked about before the bylaw ever came into place, we never really had data about, you know, how many dogs are down there and how many were off leash. But there was comments previous, I think, that we thought that the bylaw actually had improved the number of dogs who were loose down there. Do we know that?
Unless we can measure it in some actual measurable way, we don't.
Yeah.
So we don't have that. You know, remember we suggested cameras, but of course that's a whole other conversation. So really all we have is this little snapshot, but we do have the trail report hotline information and any other anecdotal information that's come in, and certainly I think it would be telling that you know, leadership, at least at the advisory table and at the Greenway Liaison table, you know, some of the Sabinus leadership acknowledged that from the pre-2017 working group conversation, when it was a bit of a brouhaha and then there was lots of conflicting information, and then the post, that once everyone came together and there was, you've got dog walker peer pressure happening on the trail now, which wasn't there before, right? And it's all, and that's what we want to inspire. It was clear that there was a level of compliance that was better. So it's anecdotal.
Yeah.
Could I say it was a measurable? Not at all, but certainly the anecdotal feedback is that this seems to work, and every time we kind of up the game a little bit and just remind people, folks seem to be compliant. I suspect with a little bit of push, the dog control presence, my hope is what we'll see is the summer survey numbers come up, and if they don't, we get to sit down and then we have that speculative conversation some more and say, what else do we need to do? It also saves us from jumping to the extreme conclusion of going, therefore we close the trail to everybody, and right, like we don't need to go there if something small works. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Really appreciate you coming. And I think we all have the same interest here to make, to shoot for 100% compliance. And so we really appreciate you coming and sharing with us. It's so much more meaningful than just having the pieces of paper.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I do appreciate it.
Okay, and thanks to your team that's here as well. Okay, we will move forward. So we'll actually move backwards. We are on 11, I think. 11.1, informational correspondence. Are there any councillors? Councillor Cannon, thank you for volunteering. You go first.
Number 5 and number 6, actually, I was going to speak on. So number 5 is a skateboard fundraiser that they're doing at the a skateboard competition as a fundraiser. And it looks like they did this previously. So I'm not totally sure what they're looking. Does the city have to okay for them to have a competition in the skateboard park?
Director of Engineering and Public Works?
Yes, it would require council approval to use that site for that particular event.
Okay, so you would need a motion.
Yeah, so I'll make a motion. May 4th is the date that they have down there, 2019.
Thank you. Is there a seconder to the motion? Councillor Lavery, thank you. Any discussion around the motion?
It looks like there's a requirement for insurance that they have to have. Is that, the city just requires a copy of that? Is that what happened previous, or?
Your worship, all events in the city require event insurance, so that's a standard requirement for every event that we have within the community.
So they just, if we okay it at this table, they just send a copy to the city?
That's correct.
Okay, I think it looks like it's a good event, and I think it'll be great to use that space.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Flynn, did you wish to speak to that?
Yes.
Okay.
I just had a question for staff. It does say there's pending dates in June and August. Can we pre-approve an unknown date and have them just work with staff to finalize? Because to me, having this come forward 2 more times doesn't make a lot of sense.
I'll ask Director of Engineering and Public Works.
Your worship, we can work with the organizers on a particular date. So if council approves the event, subject to coordination with staff, that's fine.
So Councillor Cannon, you're happy with that adjustment?
I would just say perhaps Roots and Blues weekend, those dates we probably wouldn't want. be my only thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on the motion? All those in favor? Thank you. Councillor Cannon, you had another item, did you not?
Yeah.
Okay, do you want to press your button one more time?
Similar, number 6, ride, don't hide, mental health bike ride. Just want to make a motion that we support this.
Okay, and I'll just ask staff, do you want particulars for that motion, Director of Engineering and Public Works, or a comment?
Yes, we would.
Okay, so when you say specifics, can you help us?
It does have the dates on the letter here. What other specifics?
That's really all we
That's
need.
enough.
We just need a motion to approve the event.
Okay, understand. Councillor Cannon, you're willing to make that motion?
Yep.
Seconder, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Cannon speaking to the motion.
I think it's a great cause and brings awareness to mental health. So I think it's a great thing to support.
Okay, thank you. Did anyone else wish to speak to it? Councillor Lindgren?
Thanks. So I'm in support of this motion, in support of the event, and I wanted to challenge the rest of the people sitting at this table. I'm going to cycle the 30K, and either I expect to see you out there on your bicycle or you're adding to my fundraising page.
All right. It's going to be painful one way or the other. Thank you, Councillor Lindgren. Anyone else wish to speak to the motion? All those in favor? Thank you. Okay. Councillor Lindgren, did you have an item?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
Number 14, child find. There's no response required on this. However, I did notice in the letter that we sent to them that there is a 21-year-old motion that we've fallen back on to discontinue issuance of proclamations. 21 years ago is a long time, and I think that if we're going to include that sort of statement on a letter to people, that we should probably revisit it in the near future and update it so that it looks like something that we are keeping at the top of the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, do you have any other items, Councillor Lindgren?
Sure, I could speak to number 4.
Okay.
So until I got elected here, I was working in Brody's class. I was kind of hoping he was going to be here today to speak to this. But I think that the event that he organizes is a worthwhile event, and he's requested a road closure on September 21st, and I would make a motion that we approve that road closure.
Seconded the motion. Councillor Cannon. I'll just see if there's any comments from staff. Director of Engineering and Public Works, does that motion serve the purpose?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Lindgren, would you like to speak further to the motion?
No.
Anyone else? It's a fantastic event. It was lots of fun last year. Okay, all those in favor? Passes unanimously. Any other items, Councillor Lindgren?
No.
Okay, Councillor Flynn.
I'm just wondering if whoever sends the letter to the organizers of the Soapbox Derby should let them know about the MRDT funds that are used for shoulder season events, and there may be some funding available for them if they're bringing people in from out of town, because it sounds like this event is growing and could use some of that kind of support.
Okay, fair enough, thank you. Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. Briefly, item 8. I wanted to say that I appreciate the invitation from Fish and Game. I don't see a gun course in my future. However, I would. They have quite a great facility out there, and if staff wanted to reach out and maybe they could put together a tour that I don't know if everyone's been, but it's quite an impressive facility, and maybe that might be more easier to organize than getting us all trained up for 3 hours. That would be a waste of their time for me anyway. So I would like to see that followed up on though. Thanks.
Okay, because just to the CAO, could we have staff contact Mr. Woolley and arrange for a time for council to go out?
Yes, we can try that.
Okay, thank you very much. Any others, Councillor Walsh-Richmond? Councillor Lavery?
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. And back to number 14, just with the child find one. And, you know, it's just a personal comment, actually, is all it is. Our job here is to deal with bylaws and policy and stuff like that. And this has happened, you know, in other notices coming forward, but 28 years ago with this family and with Michael Dennehy and the personal bravery and persistence of the family and of Crystal is just, it's beyond policy and stuff like that, and I just think that sometimes we have to acknowledge that, and so I just wanted to make those comments about that. Thank you.
Fair enough, thank you. Councillor Flynn?
Just wanted to say that the downtown cleanup while we were busy in a retreat was successful. So item 9, DSA's thanking us for our, didn't turn out to be $500, I don't think, $308.48. Askew's gave out coupons for volunteers for $5, and the candy store, Candy Vault, sponsored cotton candy for the kids. I think it was a good event, and hopefully next year it'll come across the highway.
Great, thank you, Councillor Flynn. Any other comments? Councillor Lindgren?
Yeah, actually, I was just looking at item, I think it's 10, the healthy communities. On the second page, just wanted to draw your attention to the Bike to Work Week, May 27th to June 2nd, and encourage everybody to make sure they get on their bike that week. The group that puts this together sets up some great stuff. I did this a couple of years ago, and I was working at the high school and was able to stop at the back patio behind the hospital overlooking McGuire Lake, which I didn't even know was there, for a free pancake breakfast on my way to work in the morning. So it was really cool. They had Jordan Green ran a bike repair shop in the Askew's parking lot up the hill. Anyway, it was really well run and really neat. It was good to see everybody out there, so don't forget.
Thank you, Councillor Lindgren. Any other items? Okay, just before I move on, it's interesting because of the items we talked about, 5 of them are volunteer-driven activities in the city here. And it seems like it's often like that. So it's really neat that people are approaching us for us to help them with their volunteer activity. Okay, we'll move on from informational correspondence. We're at item 14, council statements. Please press your button if you have a council statement. Councillor Flynn?
No.
Okay, that was from before. Any other councillors have a statement? Okay, I'll just make a brief statement then. As soon as this meeting is over, I'm going to head up to the community center. Many of you are aware of the community gathering that's happening there over the tragedy that happened a week ago Sunday at the Church of Christ. And what's happening at the community center is groups that are there to help people mourn and help people grieve and to acknowledge that this happened 9 days ago and it is not going away, especially for those people who are closest to it. And so I will go there and just bring the city and council's feelings to that event, thank them for it, and know that there's all kinds of community groups, church groups, individuals who are reaching out. We did have a call from the Prime Minister to Cindy Durkaz here in the city, just acknowledging the tragedy that had happened here. And so it's pretty far-reaching. I've heard from many cities up and down the valley as well. So appreciate that, and just to let you know that I'll represent us there in a few minutes. Any other council statements? Okay. We are at number 17. Salmon Arm Children's Festival request for assistance. And there's 2 pieces there. There's a letter from Shishwap Daycare manager Karen Bubala, and she presented to us my responses on the left-hand side. The first star of my response is basically what we said we would do, is that we would consider the request to waive at least half of the rental fee for the indoor sports arena at our April 23rd council meeting. I'm not sure if council has any comments or questions around the letter, or if there's any pending motion. Councillor Cannon.
So if we're considering that, waiving that, what would that entail? Would we have to pay those fees out of council initiatives, or what?
Let's
What
just,
would we
just
do
ask the Chief Administrative Officer. I believe that would be the course.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I think it's $612, if I remember rightly.
Okay, and then it's a two-part question for me. What I was hearing from them this year, that it wasn't other funds that they were looking for. It was basically, they were looking for bodies, so I don't know, other than if we were to volunteer at this table, how we would find them more bodies. But next year, I think it's probably more money that they would be looking for. And I guess I look ahead at one that we have coming up for the Elks Park maintenance, money that we're going to give from, perhaps if it passes, council initiative, and what we just passed for the survey and down at the park. I think that the Children's Festival has great value, and it's been going on for a lot of years. It's really a different demographic of who it services. So, I mean, I would be willing to make the motion that we cover the rental through council initiative. But I also would like to see us next year at budget time to have this perhaps as a line item for some money for the Children's Festival to go on. And on that note, you know, we kind of discussed kind of on a sidebar about what it would look like having our Children's Festival perhaps down at Canoe Beach or Marine Park, you know, and kind of put it with maybe a fireworks or whatever else our community does to celebrate Canada Day. So I guess at this point, I'm willing to make the motion that we cover the costs of the rental for the, what do we call that building now? The
Memorial Arena.
Yeah, the Memorial Arena. And we already commit city staff to help with the tent put up and take down. Is that correct?
Yep. Yes, we do.
Yeah. So I would suggest that we commit to that, continue that commitment, and look at helping them out with the rental.
Okay, so Councillor Cannon, just to clarify your motion, is that for the $612?
Yep.
Okay, is there a seconder to the motion? Councillor Lindgren, thank you.
And if I could just speak
Speaking
to that
the motion.
motion.
Yep.
So I've made that motion, but do we need a motion to commit city staff? Or is that already something that's been committed?
Yep, no, we don't need a motion to commit city staff.
Okay. Then I don't need to speak to the motion.
Councillor Flynn, did you want to speak to the motion? Okay, Councillor Flynn?
Yeah, when they presented, one of the questions I was asking or had asked or was trying to understand is us purchasing the Memorial Arena has doubled their cost. Now, so now we're saying we'll double their cost, but we're going to absorb half of it. I'm trying to figure out why we doubled their cost. I haven't got what I feel is a satisfactory answer, and it just seems kind of counterintuitive to say, okay, now you have to rent it 2 days because you got to prepare the night before, and then you need it for the first, and then you got to clean up, and we're going to charge you for 2 days, and then we got to take it out of council initiatives. I guess I'm just struggling with the process and how us purchasing it automatically doubled a volunteer group's cost.
Okay. Is there a staff member who would like to try to answer that question? What I could say is that I think the fall fair had flexibility that the Shuswap Recreation Society does not have. So the facility is needed for 2 days, because you have to set the facility up. And so that's why the rental is 2 days instead of 1. Whereas the Fall Fair was able just to waive one of those days and just have 1 day paid for. That may not be a satisfactory answer, but that is the answer.
It's not, but,
So
it's not
Councillor
at
Flynn,
all.
did you want to speak further to it?
well, I don't know what I can speak to. I think a group like this should get it for free. And the fact that it has to come from council initiatives or something like that, to me, is counterintuitive, but we've dealt with that for 13 years, and I'm not gonna get to change that. So, I think the Rec Society should have some flexibility for organizations like this, but then where do you draw the line? And it's just kind of alarming that their costs double because we bought the building.
Fair enough. Any other comments before I call a question? Councillor Lindgren.
Yeah, just my thoughts on that. They were saying that because they have to go in the night before, that limits, they can't rent it to somebody else that day. But it's my understanding that that's not a popular spot at that time of year. And maybe that second day would only be charged if somebody else showed up and asked for the spot and they had to turn away other revenue. I mean, if it's a day that doesn't generate revenue, why are we charging them for it at all?
Yeah, I'd just like to clarify that we actually aren't. And the Shuswap Recreation Society, of course, looks after, manages a whole bunch of spaces for us, including the rec center, including the soccer facility. And so if you applied that to all of those rentals, I think they have to have a consistent way to do it. And so what they're saying, what the Children's Festival people are saying is, can you pardon half of that for us for this year? I think the other discussion is a bigger discussion. Councillor Cannon.
So the amount that on my motion just covers the 1 day?
That's right, that's what they paid last year, $612.
Why don't I make the motion that we cover both days? Can I change my motion?
You could amend your motion if you wish.
Do I have the
Who's the seconder, Councillor Lindgren? Okay.
And then speaking to that, with the Recreation Society, because I have that hat on sometimes too, they get lots of requests for different buildings that they manage as the Recreation Society, charities and different groups that want to do fundraisers and stuff. So they do have to have kind of black and white rules for that reason. Otherwise, they would get so many requests of people wanting to, you know, only get charged for 1 day or what have you, so.
Yeah. No, understood. Thank you very much. Just for council's consideration, the City of Salmon Arm does sponsor the Children's Festival with a $3,000 grant and aid, which I think you're aware of. And in talking to Karen, I did ask her to make sure she would write us a letter that we would forward to the budget for 2009 or for 2020. So council will have an opportunity at that time if they wish to change, you know, the way we sponsor that event. So the motion now reads $1,224. Is that right, Councillor Cannon?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to call the question. I think we've had enough discussion. All those in favor? Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. Okay, we have one more item to deal with, and that is.
Time do you have to be up to?
It's okay. I just want to be here for this one.
5:20.
Item 18, Salmon Arm Elks Park Annual Maintenance. You have a motion before you that Councillor Flynn and I had brought as a notice of motion. Councillor Flynn, do you want to speak to the motion? Please. Hang on. Okay.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you to staff for working with Mayor Harrison and myself on developing a motion. Simply put, Councillor Harrison, myself, and Councillor Cannon were asked to meet with the minor ball group. Minor ball's numbers are going up significantly. Baseball, not slow pitch, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Minor baseball. And they currently use, for a certain level of players, I believe it's Mosquito. Elks Hall fields. There's 2 of them. And over the years, the Elks aging group has had a harder time maintaining those fields to a level that's really up to the standards needed for minor ball. We used to pay, or put it in the budget for a while to do this, do the maintenance, and we stopped doing so. And in my opinion, moving forward, this should be part of the annual maintenance plan. But my argument is, if we were to need to replace those ball diamonds, and staff has helped us with these numbers, and if those were ever pulled from our community inventory, it would cost us about $1 million per field. So about $2 million to replace those fields somewhere in town if we own the land. That doesn't even include purchase costs, I don't think. So the community is receiving a significant benefit from the Elks having these facilities available. Ball is renting them from Elks. We're not involved in subsidizing that in any way, shape, or form. And as I said, if we had to replace them, whether it's at Klahani or somewhere else, it would be a significant cost. So my feeling is, for a small contribution from this year's council initiatives, we can have our staff maintain the fields, do some irrigation work and mowing, and get them improving in the quality of the fields, with the intent of us taking over the maintenance for minor ball in the future, not having to do it through council initiatives. If we're going to put this money forward, and I make it kind of analogous to the joint use agreement with the schools, I also feel we should negotiate a long-term joint use agreement with Elks so that there's some certainty to the ball league that they're going to be able to use these fields. And if we're going to invest some of our money, we want to make sure we don't get cut off from using them. So it's two-pronged. One is the financial commitment for this year, and hopefully in the future part of our regular budget. And then the second is to work on some type of joint use agreement so that that asset that the Elks have provided can be used for ball in the future and has some certainty around it. Because I don't want to spend $5,500 from council initiatives if Elks could pull it next year. Did I summarize it well enough?
I think you did an excellent job. Questions from council around that? Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I have 3 just clarification questions, and I'm in support of this. So we just spent $3,000 out of, a little over $3,000 out of council initiatives. How much do we have left, just for my own orientation?
Chief Financial Officer.
You're sitting at about 19,000 before any motions today.
Before, thank you very much. And question number 2, clarification, is that, so we're not talking of, we're talking of redirecting the money from council initiative line item to another engineering line item. Okay, thank you for that. And number 3, clarification question is, I'm assuming the intent of the motion then is to bring this back to the budget process in the fall?
Councillor Flynn.
If I could answer that, I think in my discussions with the Director of Engineering and Public Works, if he sees this intent and there is some kind of joint use agreement signed, it would just be built into his budget, I believe. Is that correct, Director of Engineering and Public Works?
Just check with the Director of Engineering.
Yes, Your Worship, that would be staff's intent, and then council of the day could discuss it at that point if they wanted to review it.
Thank you. So, Councillor Lavery, go ahead.
Thank you. So as a follow-up to that then, will the long-term use agreement come back to council?
Councillor Flynn.
That's a great question. I would assume it would have to for us to approve it.
Yes, it would.
But I'm just instructing staff to work on it. And then the last thing I would, just to answer your question about council initiatives, I don't think in any of the time I've been here we've ever spent it, and it doesn't carry over, so my goal is to spend it this year.
Councillor Lavery, did you wish to?
Yeah, no,
yes,
I'm in
please.
favor of it. These are just pure clarification questions, and I support the initiative. Thank you.
Okay. Any other speakers? What I could say is that, first of all, appreciate the work of staff, Councillor Flynn, Councillor Cannon, and I've been up to Elks several times and met with members of the Elks, and their intention is to help young people, and to help young people through Salmon Arm minor baseball. So I think the second part of that motion, they will be willing to participate in that second part of that motion. And appreciate it. As Councillor Flynn said, it's a win-win-win all the way around. Okay, all in favor of the motion? Carries unanimously.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, we will recess until 6 o'clock, when we'll have our public session on plastic shopping bags.
Do you think there's value in more of us showing up with you, or do you think it's fine?
I don't think so.
I already sent mine. I told, she knows we have a conference.
Thank you, Alan.
Dinner is ready.